Hey guys, Dark Humility here with the grand, the great Dark Humility's Season 8 Project Diablo 2 late game mapping tier list and infographic. It has been completed just as of last night, 9/19. It is the biggest and bestest tier list for PD2 I've ever created. Just when I thought I could not outdo myself, I always seem to find a way to do it. 118 builds listed in the late game mapping tier list itself, not counting all the extra builds for Ubers and the infographic. Over 80 hours of testing every beta, including this one. It's always a huge, monumental achievement. You can always catch me at twitch.tv/darkhumility for 6 days of Diablo action of some kind. Of course, PD2 new season is coming up September 22nd, so that's what we're going to be at for the hardcore assassin blasting away. So just before we get into the meat of it, of course, I'll let you know that every part of this video, every kind of segment of the video will be broken down into timestamps, so you'll be able to refer to any part of the video that you're curious about, including maybe a specific tree. I don't break it down by specific build. That'd be a bit too much for timestamps on YouTube, but you could break it down by like lightning tree and whatnot and cold tree, and we will indeed be doing that. I'd also like to take some time to thank the whole entire Project Diablo 2 dev team, Senpai Something, Erlen, K-Knight, and everyone else that works so hard to bring us this awesome game and to make it better every season. I don't lie when I think that the game just gets better every season. It might not be, absolutely everything I'd always want all at once, but there's always things that, I think maybe need to be changed that they change in addition to a lot of improvements I don't even think of or my community doesn't think of. They're always on top of it. It's always a wonderful, wonderful thing. All right, so before we get into the meat of it, I'm going to give you guys a bit of a tour of the tier list in general. But first, I'm going to show you guys what's new. So if you guys have, I got a lot of fans of this tier list apparently. Reddit, YouTube, and otherwise, they're always asking for it now. So I almost feel obligated to do it. I mean, I enjoy it. I enjoy testing. I enjoy doing this. You can see I put a lot of passion and work into this, but man, I'd almost feel bad if I didn't at this point. But here we go. I feel like I inspire a lot of people, and I give people a lot of good ideas for what to make, and I really try to inspire people when I test the beta as well, to keep playing and to try new things in this awesome mod. So let's show you guys what's new first. So there's a couple of new things in this tier list. I've upgraded it, like I said. It's bigger and badder than ever. And under popular request, we have a couple of new sections. So instead of just fortification for whether or not a build is good in fortified maps in the late game, we now have a budget indicator and a hardcore indicator. So for every build now, I will indicate, how good is it with budget gear, or how much access does that build have to a budget setup. Just having an access to a budget setup will be one check mark, and then of course working extremely well on a budget, such as maybe a set like Tring set or IK set, or even not requiring hardly any gear at all, if it has 3 check marks, is indicated. Like, you really don't need much. The build will still be capable of some kind of mapping, which is interesting. But yeah, we have that, and then hardcore is a little bit simpler, which is, can the build be modified for hardcore, or is the build already excelling at hardcore with most standard setups, or is it like just really strong in hardcore and easy to make work with hardcore gear? Obviously, if there's X's in any of these, that means no, this build doesn't work on a budget. No, you should not run fortified maps, and no, this build maybe shouldn't be played in hardcore because it's challenging to survive on that build in hardcore. That's not to say that you can't do any of those things or you can't somehow try to make it work on a budget, but in some cases, it's actually impossible when it comes to the budget because it's just not budget, it's just expensive. So, um, that's how that works there. We also have another new section here, new in Season 8. This will show every build that has been added to the tier list since Season 7. So we added 9 new builds to the tier list. There was 109 before, now there's 118, I think, as long as I counted them correctly. And you have them all here. So that's pretty cool. I also, of course, made some of the titles a bit more obvious what it's talking about, like the fact that the builds have gone up ranks from Season 7 to Season 8. Down ranking really hasn't been too much of a thing the last 2 seasons. A little bit here and there as things get retested and readjusted compared to other builds, but not because of the patches. Even the nerfs haven't really done that much damage compared to the amount of builds they're bringing up to par, which is what I think a lot of people prefer developers do in video games. They focus on servicing the weaker builds as opposed to, you know, trying to nerf everything into the ground, which is good. I'd say maybe PD2's approach in the very beginning was to nerf everything into the ground, and I think they've had a learning curve as well. And they've learned that maybe that's not the most exciting approach. So they do nerf things when needed, but it's not like a primary approach anymore, which is pretty awesome. As you can see, we still have all of the features of the Season 7 tier list as well, including starters, Uber builds, recommended D-clone killers, recommended Rathma killers. A nice graphic here for just to understand maps and their respective immunities and how much resistance those immunities are at, so you can know how to break them. You got your top 10s in each of those, and then of course you got your top 10 starters, and you got your starter builds. You have your solo mapping top 10, which is just the strongest late game mappers in the game, which is literally just taken from the late game solo mapping tier list. I just plop them here. It's always hard to compare builds within tiers, which we'll explain in a bit, but do the best we can. Season 7 to Season 8, just to show builds moving, how far they moved, overall class power ranking, which is this is probably the most subjective part of the tier list, where I kind of explain my feeling of how strong classes are compared to one another if you want to invest in a particular class. A lot of this stuff is literally copy paste from Season 7 because it really hasn't changed. You got your top group mapping builds, tier 3 or tier 4s. You got your solo dungeon capable builds. And of course, in the center here, you got the massive late game solo mapping tier list, which has 118 builds with a tier from S to F. And of course, whether or not it can operate well under conditions of fortify or just decently. Same thing with budget, decently or well or not at all. Hardcore excels, decent or not at all. And then of course we have all the way down here, so it goes pretty far down. You got every class is organized, and the builds are organized by tree. In some cases there's an other because it doesn't really fit in a tree necessarily, because it's just it's granted by items. There's like a lot of things that are like items only. You can argue maybe that Blade Dance is part of the shadow tree because of Venom, but I don't know. Like a lot of these like item granted things I put at the bottom just to separate them. And then of course on the far left here, besides my URL, we have a bunch of fun keys here. So these are keys to help you understand the late game mapping tier list, specifically what each of the tiers mean. Mapping primary factor, how we compare builds. The minor factors that can nudge a build maybe up or down, depending, 1/3 of a tier. Builds are definitely graded 1/3 of a tier, so S-, S, and S+ are each a 1/3 tier increase. A build from A+ to S+ is a very significant jump. It is very obvious, and it's a significant power increase. whereas a 1/3 tier is what I would term noticeable. It's noticeable, the power difference between a 1/3 tier build like A plus to S minus or A to A plus. That kind of stuff is noticeable. It is solidly noticeable, but it's not insanely huge. Once it's like a whole tier, it is a massive difference, and it's pretty big. And of course, that's how that works. And of course, we let you know what the check marks and the X's mean under fortification, budget, and hardcore. Dungeon buddies, that section over to the right there, just letting you know it's for group mapping. And then overall, just like a thing I always put in the tier list, which is a really short guide to what's going to be strong in the early game. This kind of helps you understand these starters, my recommended starters, pretty well as well. No. I'm going to be going Claws of Thunder, arcane farming in the beginning. I'll probably be ending up with doing fortified maps at some point. Yeah, PD2 is pretty insane. Yeah, PD2 is looking very good. Definitely encourage as many people to download it and try it. If you love D2R or love the original D2, but maybe you're getting bored of it because there's only so much content, this game has an endless amount. All right, so that's kind of how it works in general. Yeah, clear speed is the most important mapping primary factor. Minor factors, map versatility. You know, can they do a lot of maps, or is their map pool kind of limited? Expense, gear level. That's something that's already kind of described by budget, but and survivability is kind of described by hardcore. But they do kind of factor, like I said, a tiny bit into the ranking. But as you can see, most builds don't have a lot of issues with surviving or whatnot in general, and they can do some kind of depending on what gear you give them and whatnot. So this is kind of important to understand. Let's kind of go over the tiers and what they mean and what they don't mean, and how this works before we actually get into the actual late game solo mapping tier list. So we just did the tour. I showed you guys what was new. And what we're going to do now is kind of explain the tiers just real quick. So with the tiers, S, overpowered, or also known as strongest builds, so best builds for late game mapping. What we're talking about here is, once you get all of your gear, they're tested at near max gear, but not maximum because you can't have corruptions in the beta. So you can simulate them by customizing number of sockets on a lot of items, but that means anything like jewelry, belts, boots, or gloves are not optimized no matter what. In a lot of cases, some of the other items are not optimized either. So, because maybe they don't have a plus skill on a magic damage build where sockets don't really affect it that much and it would rather have a corruption. So, that being said, they're tested at like near max power so that you guys can really understand, like, if you want to work towards that build at its strongest level, we want you guys to know with absolute certainty that it's going to perform at this level. And you guys can expect it to perform pretty near that level when you play the build. But yeah, these are best builds. These are strong or balanced. It's pretty straightforward. I think they're strong builds, A tier builds. That's most of the builds here. There's definitely a solid amount of builds that reach at least the S minus tier. I think there's over 30, at least variations of builds as well. These are like 6 variations of the same build kind of, but I mean, if you don't count that, it's still over 20, 25, so definitely a really solid like 6th or more builds hitting that power level there. Stronger balanced is like half of the builds. That's like a ton of them. That's just how balanced the game is now. The game just gets more balanced every season. Every season it feels like there's less and less builds in those trash tiers, even the viable tiers, honestly. Coming out of those like not great tiers. Anything like C and below is kind of meh or trash or or kind of icky. Things that are B or above, they feel good in certain situations at the very least. Even the B tier builds can crush a tier 1 map typically with the right gear setup. They might struggle in harder maps though, tier 3s, unique maps, things like that, depending on the situation, or they're just not that fast. They're just, they can do it. They're not fast. Remember, speed is the main thing that they're graded on. how fast can we move through a map using the mechanics of the build as best as possible. So yeah, B is like decent, effective. So it's just, yeah, it's an effective build. And in certain situations, I could see why someone would want to play that. It's pretty good. Anything below that is kind of anywhere from to no. So yeah, that's pretty much what that is. Um, oops. Okay. So yeah, definitely consider that. Now, one thing to kind of keep in mind when looking at this here is that we are making this during the open beta and with the tentative final patch notes out for Season 8. After all the closed beta testing, everything's been tested and retested. After every closed beta patch, I would retest things if they changed a build that I already tested. So everything was tested from the notes. It was all good. But one thing to note is that things can always change within like the first week of the season. There might be like a small buff to something. They normally don't nerf things anymore after the season starts because people will get mad because they invested their time into the build. They got hyped about a build and then they made it, and then all of a sudden they nerf it into the ground. That's always not ideal. Typically, if you're going to want to do your nerfs, you want to do it before the season starts. So they might do some though. They might do maybe some small buffs or fixes as well. So there might be some small things. If anything happens, I will make a guesstimate like I typically do. Usually like 2 to 3 builds might be affected like every season by some of these guesstimates, and I might like, based on a lot of my huge amount of experience testing this game at this point, I will make a judgment call as to whether or not that kind of a change would affect it at all, and if it does, what would it do to it. Obviously knowing that things like mechanics changes are more involved than things like just base number changes and so on. And so like big mechanical changes like increasing a skill's AoE or something, that's likely to do something for sure, whereas a big number change might be required just to move it up like 1/3 or down 1/3, but it kind of depends. But I have a good working knowledge of all these builds and kind of where they're at and kind of how much it would take for them to move somewhere. But that being said, it's never perfect. No matter how much testing I do, every season I do retesting, even of builds that don't change, which is what I did this season as well. Not every build that doesn't change has been retested every season. A lot of them are numbers just from Season 7 because there's just so many builds at this point. But they just haven't changed. There's no gear changes. None of the gear that they use has been modified by the patch. None of the numbers have changed on the skills. Nothing like that. And yeah, but no matter how much I tested, I always find every season when I retest some things, every once in a while, I'll come across like 1 or 2 builds that got a rating that I think was maybe unfair or tested improperly. It wasn't tested using the very best setup I could have on the beta, which kind of gave me, or maybe even with the proper mechanics of the build as well in some cases. And I'm always learning more, so it's always getting better. It's always getting more accurate. That's how it is in Season 8. That's a mouthful. All right, so with all that intro stuff kind of out of the way, we're going to get into the meat of it, and we're going to start with Sorceress Builds for the late game solo mapping tier list. Once again, we mostly just test I've only tested tier 3s now, actually, as of this season, just so that there's no bias whatsoever towards builds because they're so good in tier 1s or things like that. That does mean, though, that some builds, like, and I'll explain this when I talk about the build, perform insanely well in like a tier 1 scenario, even though but they start to fall off towards like the higher end maps, like the unique maps and the tier 3s. Unique maps are tier 3s, but like we've tested a decent amount of unique maps this time as well. But yeah, I think you guys get the idea. Um, um, Lake of Fire actually doesn't need infinities, so I'll explain what budget means a bit more when we kind of go over the builds. But yeah, tier 1 farming is legit. It is. The thing about tier 1 farming though is that if you compare builds on tier 1 farming, you're mostly just comparing a build's mobility at that point, because every build with the right gear can crush a tier 1. Almost every build. So like you only really see differences between the builds in the hardest maps to begin with, which is like why I do this, so that you guys can understand, okay, this build will do it. You know, it's not as strong maybe, but you know, it's okay in general. But as you can see, almost all builds are like S, A, or B at this point. That's just how good the balance is in this game. So anyways, let's get started, and I think you guys will understand how this works. Some of you guys might be new here in the chat as well. I'll explain why, you know, some ratings are the way they are, so it is what it is. All right, so Nova, Lightning Tree, Sorceress. Nova has received some nerfs this season. I do have a demo video of Nova from last season that's pretty close to like how strong it still is. It's got a little bit nerfed by Lightning Mastery actually, but the energy shield has been buffed. So its survivability has gone up. It's been traded for its strength. Nova has always been one of the top mapping builds for many seasons now in PD2. Probably at least 4 or 5 seasons at this point. And it's very strong. It crushes maps, not just cows. One thing to keep in mind is I don't just test cows. I always test builds in at least one other map that is not cows. That is a strong map for that build. No immunities. Try to make it realistic to something that someone would actually power farm with that build. All right. Yeah, anyway, we'll continue now at Nova. So Nova, S tier, very strong. One of the strongest builds in the game currently. It's a top 10 build. I'll show it over there. It's not great at Fortified though. It's better at AoE clearing. It's better at using its mobility and whatnot to its advantage. It's not good on a budget though. This build, if you want Nova to be effective, we're talking like things like Infinity Staff, really good corruptions like mana per kill, LPK, lots of really good stuff to make it feel good. Good Griffins rolls, you know, things like that. It's definitely a difficult build to get going. For any kind of effective gameplay and maps. Once again, in LOD content, almost any build can perform, but those are starter builds, and we'll talk about those as we go on. All right, in hardcore, you can make Nova work by, you know, modifying it with a shield like Gurks or something, which works well with Energy Shield and Ashudas, and then use Infinity on the Merc, but it will do less damage. All right, but it's not naturally good at hardcore because the staff version is a lot stronger of that build, and that build is a lot squishier in hardcore. Charge Bolt. Charge Bolt is surprisingly powerful, but it's not nearly as powerful as some of these other builds. It's not like the Charge Bolts pierce through enemies or anything. It struggles against really tanky monsters. It's once again kind of like Nova. You're going to need really good gear so it does damage. And it's kind of hard for that to work, and it does also have a lot of the same hardcore options as Nova. I don't remember if I have a demo of this from last season, but at least one from last season or the season before. Only lost a tiny bit of damage from the Lightning Mastery nerf. The Lightning Mastery nerf also affected Chain Lightning, which is at S-. It used to be a top 10 mapping build. It's kind of fallen out a little bit though with some of these damage nerfs that have come through. Still crushing fortified maps to some, or non-fortified though. Lightning is very powerful, not just Chain Lightning. And then you also have budget options available, maybe with an Act 3 Merc to help with static field. There's definitely some ways you can make it work. But honestly, this build won't crush tier 3s until it gets its full build. So you're mostly looking at tier 1s and tier 2s with the budget version of that build. And then hardcore, once again, kind of a lot of the same kind of modifications you can do for the above builds. Zeal, Sork, Ferocity, Last Wish was also specifically tested this season. These have all been tested this season, which is kind of interesting. It's an interesting build. You're basically proccing Charge Bolt off of the Last Wish itself. It's not as good as using Passion, Double Dreams, and scaling off of Lightning Mastery, though. Melee approaches in general with less AoE tend to do better against higher HP monsters, especially because their damage numbers are so high, but they don't necessarily have AoE. So they're better in a fortified map. And fortified maps, remember, are competitive with regular maps to some extent. I think higher density regular maps are still better than fortified maps because of the travel time. You have to like travel between monster packs in a fortified map. That's really the only thing that makes it slower though. Otherwise, it's the same because of double loot, double experience, and all that other, yeah. And, obviously the half density, double monster HP, and 20% more damage on the flip side. Of course, we got some other good thing. For hardcore, these builds are pretty hard to make work because a lot of the tankier options you just can't use because you have all these forced rune words you basically have to use for the build to work. Maybe like Phoenix, just other stuff. Just you can't really get blocked very easily. It's just tough. You can do it on hardcore. You always can do anything on hardcore, but it's as it says here, build requires GG or highly specialized gear. Oh, sorry, not that one. Build not recommended. Challenging to survive on hardcore. So it's just challenging. That's it. It's challenging. You can try it. If you want a real challenge, make one of these builds on hardcore and just show me, send me the video and I'd be like, dang, okay. Not bad, not bad. I don't recommend it for most newer players, though, or people trying to understand what's going on, though. Bear's Sork is kind of the same thing, limited in its options in that regard. Looking at some more decent builds, maybe viable builds here, they're decent. They really just lack AoE, and their damage is a bit like focused on like one enemy. They even have less AoE than melee builds like Zeal, so even in fortified maps, they're slower, definitely slower. But using a Kingslayer on his Sork as well, using Vengeance Sork is a potential build you can do. Take advantage of all those masteries you have, getting those LELCs, LE charms, LE small charms. Always a way to make these work though. Bear's Sork can slap insanely fast, can be pretty tanky, but once again, with dreams and whatnot, it's a bit harder to sustain that survivability, and against tougher monsters, you're going to find yourself at odds for sure. Anything that requires like high-end rune words that are like super high-end, that use super high-end runes, obviously is not going to be a budget build. There's no budget versions of these builds exist. You just have to get really high-end items to play them, period. Alright, so now that we're in the cold tree, let's continue. So Frost Nova, this build didn't change this season at all. Kind of like these didn't really change either. Ferocity got buffed a tiny bit. That's why I retested this one. And I also split them up too, so it's easier to kind of see what's going on here. These builds are about the same strength. Yeah. Anyway, Frost Nova, S-, it's still crushing. This is a carryover from Season 7. There are 0 changes made to this build. It's just a slightly weaker version of Nova because you can't get... well, first of all, you can't even get the buffed energy shield from Season 8 now. You can't get it quite as high. You can't get it as strong because you don't have telekinesis as one of the synergies like it is for Nova. It does almost as much damage, or in some cases more damage, though, so... It's definitely still up there, and it's still a very strong approach. One of its strengths is that, unlike Nova, it freezes enemies, so that's kind of where some of its power comes from. Once again, though, Nova builds, I don't consider Nova builds to be budget builds. I consider them to be viable once you have a really good setup. Otherwise, they're just frustrating to play. Hardcore would be... Yeah, once again, kind of the same thing. Just use some of those tankier shields. Maybe Gurks, maybe Medusas with a block helm. Extra block chance on corruptions. Something like that will work. And you'll probably survive with the Shiver armor and the right amount of survivability. Get that defense up on a Frost Nova build. And you'll be good. Frozen Orb. Frozen Orb was actually retested, and this build didn't change really this season, but when I retested it, I actually found that if you play it most optimally, you don't have to cast as many orbs, and it seems to be moving faster. I think I might have underestimated some of the approaches on this build. And it's actually now in the top 10. It's top 10 mapper, but not because of any change in Season 8. It's just really fast. It's insanely strong. Frozen Orb is crazy strong. Definitely recommend anyone trying it if you want to. I don't think I have a demo of this build available on YouTube. I should have made one though during this beta, but I forgot. So that's good though. It's really strong. Pretty much use a lot of the same gear as something like Frost Nova, Death Fathom, Medusas. You're gonna crush. There are somewhat budget versions of this build available though. You don't necessarily need Death Fathoms and things like that. You know, can use some of those weaker items, and they will still do a lot of damage. It's also a starter build, so you, even without any gear at all, it can help farm LOD content. So it will perform to some degree with weak items. Hardcore, once again, can make it tanky with gear modifications. The standard versions of these builds, though, often use staves because they do the most damage and allow for the most numbers of facets. Ice Barrage, though, not necessarily. Ice Barrage can work with an insane amount of FCR, or it can work with not as much FCR, but with way more damage. But either way, Ice Barrage was buffed this season. It got a mechanics buff, which, like I said, is the highest tier buff any build can receive. It received a increase of the radius or area of effect of each of the shards. That means that most of the time now, monsters are taking often double or even triple damage what they used to, because they're being hit by multiple shards now, where they weren't before. This is an insane buff. It doesn't look like much. It's like 0.6 radius on the yards or something, but it's pretty big. And what it does is just makes this build like absolutely destroys. I actually have a brand new Season 8 demo of this build up on YouTube now. Make sure to check that out. It is really strong. And obviously, since once again you don't even have the strongest build because you can't have all the corruptions in the beta, you can see just how strong it is even without them. And it's pretty nuts. Yeah, definitely what I'd consider to be one of the strongest builds in Season 8. And you're definitely going to want to check it out. If you want to play a sorceress specifically, highly recommend this build. Very good. It's, you know, once again, it's decent in the budget category. There's decent budget options. It's a starter build potentially. Fortify, it's really good stuff in general. Honestly, like, you could go Fortify on this build, but I think you're better off using the mobility of the Sorc and just crushing them in one shot. And it has good AoE, but you can do it either way. So it's not like Fortify is like it's just possible. Remember, 1 means Fortified Maps are viable for the build, and 2 check marks is ideal. More check marks, the more powerful it is in either hardcore, budget, or Fortify. Just remember that. And if there's no check marks and there's an X, that means probably you should avoid that if possible. I mean, once again, you know, you can do whatever you want. This mod, you know, really lets the dreams run wild, so you can do whatever you want. All right, anyway, Blizzard. Blizzard is a carryover from Season 7. 0 changes to this build. It's great in Fortified Maps, but against other maps, you know, it's got that cooldown thing kind of going on and doesn't have tons of AoE, so it's not like one of the very strongest builds, but it does a ton of damage, though. And it pretty much one-shots anything it hits, and you can use it in combination with other skills to really crush for sure. It did get nerfed, I think, at some point. It got buffed, and then it got nerfed, and then there you go. Budget, once again, a potential starter build, and hardcore friendly if put on a shield, you know, get some block, maybe get some extra DR and res, and you're set to go. Maybe focus a bit more on energy shield, which is how you make them all work. But, you know, typically the standard versions of these builds, though, are using maybe 2-handers or using like more facets, just more damage. Sorc likes as much damage as possible, so oftentimes you're going to rarely see that double check here on hardcore on a Sorc, because they prefer damage over survivability. It's just how the build seems to, how the Sorc seems to work in general. Has good sustain oftentimes, but yeah, that's how it goes. Glacial Spike. Glacial Spike is a carryover as well. They buffed Glacial Spike, I think, back in Season 6, and it actually does clear maps by itself, so it has a rating. There you go. It's on the edge of strong and balanced and decent and effective. It does clear monsters, though. Doesn't have, like, insane AoE or anything, though. And, yeah, just like the other ones, it can be made on a budget, and it can be effective. All right, Cold Enchant. This is one of those builds where... without Infinity, you're probably not even clearing like a tier 1 or anything because it just won't do any damage because it's based on your Cold Enchant skill. You also need a lot of skillers and a lot of power to make it do anything whatsoever, so no budget for that one. Also, it is a bow Sorc build, so it's already Sorc is already kind of squishy, and now there's like 0 options for wearing a shield because you have to use a bow. So no hardcore for that build. Shiver Armor Passive Sorc. Alright, so this is also a build that I have a video up on for. This is I have a video up on my YouTube here. Just posted it last night. Just like Ice Barrage, it's my only other Sorc demo, which is the Shiver Armor Passive Sorc. So they got a new item in Season 8 called Innocence. I think this is maybe a good time to introduce this. It has Blade Shield. Blade Shield procs any on-striking effects, or any kind of effects that would proc normally just on striking. It's been used for Leech on the Assassin quite a bit. It's been used for a lot of things, but technically the Blade Shield strikes monsters. When you're on top of them or near them, it will proc the effects and it will kill monsters with them. This rune word grants it to any class, not just the assassin, and it's brand new in Season 8. And it has enabled a whole host of builds. You'll see here on the new builds in Season 8, or new in Season 8, you'll see that there's a lot of these builds here, these proc passive builds. And the reason why they are here is because they are now possible. And then there's some other builds, like some Zeal builds that already use some of those procs that are even stronger because of it. And they don't even rely on Zeal as much anymore, and much more just rely on the fact that you can stand on top, telly on top, move it around in between monsters, and proc these effects. So the way this build works is you have a buffed Dangoons now having 31% chance to cast Frost Nova. And you basically are just you're a Frost Nova Sorc, but you don't actually use Frost Nova yourself. All you got to do is make yourself as tanky as possible, which is why this is a double check on hardcore. You just make yourself as tanky as possible. You get a really strong Shiver Armor. You even max out Shiver Armor for damage, because Shiver Armor does a lot of damage too when it's fully maxed out. And then you just get a maxed out Shiver Armor. You get maxed out Frost Nova synergies, there is crossover there. So Shiver Armor is one of the synergies for Frost Nova. So there's actually great synergy in this build. And then you have Dangoons and you have Innocence, and then you just jump around and kill everything with Frost Nova. Just trying to make sure to insert yourself into as many monsters as possible. And it does a lot of damage. You're extremely tanky. It's actually pretty great stuff. Overall, the speed isn't like insane or anything, but it's actually decent. It's pretty strong clear speed, somewhere between strong and decent at the very least. It would actually surprise you at how fast you can clear with something like this when you max it out with LELCs and everything else. This has always been my favorite build from LOD for PvP, is Shiver Armor Sorc, where you just like stand in front of a Zealer or a Whirlwind Barb and kill them in one Zeal or one Whirlwind, unless they're stacked with the Brim with Cold, Res, or Sorb. So yeah, it's pretty insane. I love that this is actually a thing now, that you can just like max out Shiver Armor and just jump around and kill things. So it's pretty cool. So I have it on there. It's a pretty neat build. Hopefully that inspires you to do things for sure. All right, yeah, exclamation S8 tier list if you guys want to follow along, by the way. All right, Combustion Fireball. So Combustion Fireball, you'll see here. all these builds are carryovers from season 7. No changes to Fire Sork whatsoever in this season. Didn't get anything. So for the most part, this is just a readjustment after retesting. With like Ming Song and whatnot, but combustion is still kind of clunky ever since they made it not one shot everything automatically. It's still good, and obviously it's still a great starter build. And then Meteor, the problem with Meteor has always been this, and it has been in previous seasons as well. It's just slow. That's all it is. It will one-shot almost everything. Like, it'll one-shot cow paps. It just takes a long time for the Meteor to kill things. It doesn't take as long as it used to, so they lowered all the frames on that and everything. It's just, it's just slow. It's slow. That's all there is to it. But it's not super slow. If it was, it would be lower than A, so it's not bad. Totally map with that Meteor. Hydra's been nerfed too many times to be that effective at mapping, but it's still decent, I guess. And if you try to map with this combination of skills here, God help you. That's painful. Very painful. And then Fire Enchant, yeah. Once again, those bow builds, these are bow builds here. There's no good hardcore options because there's no shield and there's no summons like some of those other builds with bows. So that's why they're fine, and then these builds are not. So you're kind of on your own trying to survive on the front lines there. It's not a good time in hardcore. You're probably gonna die. All right. Hydra, not usable. No, it's still decent for Ubers. It's just like it's because of the Uber bosses. Like they nerfed it a billion times. So that's all there really is to say about it. That's pretty much all the insight I have on that. Not a lot of interesting things going on in the fire tree this season either, so not really going to talk about it much. Druid builds. All right, so Druid builds. We're in the Druid builds. Elemental tree. As you can see here, this is a real head scratcher for me. Now, I'm not sure why this is the case, but there's a few times this season where some builds are already like at the cusp of that ultimate power level. They're so close, and they got buffed into that ultimate power level. There's a few of these builds actually this season, and this is one of them. Wind was already pushing it. It was already pushing it. It was very close last season. But now it got buffed. Yes, it got buffed. Twister got buffed again. And this build flies through maps. Like Sewers of Haragoth, a lot of other ones, they just get flattened. And you're fast, it's just a flattening. One thing to note is that all these strongest builds, just like every other one, you can expect to be about as strong as any other build with the same rating, right? And that is the case for all these S+ builds. They're all about as strong as one another, but there might be small differences, which I try to tease out in that top 10 there. But yeah, it's this is a crazy strong build. If you never wanted to play this before, you should now. You can use Horizons versions, you can use Brimstone versions. It doesn't matter. You can focus on that negative res. You can focus on make sure you get that max FCR, and that thing will just crush everything. Hardcore is good because you have summons, so even with the staff, you're good. That has a lot of good tanky shield options as well, even with FCR, like Tavek's Glory. Budget, it works very well on a budget in the lower tiers of mapping, of course. It's very strong because physical damage, it will kill everything as long as you have some damage and you have protection from your summons, and you have some FCR, which, a lot of really easy rune words. Doesn't really take too much to make that strong. So now that we're out of the Sork, which honestly kind of struggles with hardcore and budget a little bit, you'll see this because the Sork, most builds really need that maximum negative enemy res off of Infinity and some other stuff just to work well to some extent. Whereas now that we're getting down to the Druid, you can see that the Druid just as a whole operates better on a budget and has a lot safer builds just naturally. And you'll see this as a trend. Also keep in mind the Druid also has things like Oak Sage and Cyclone Armor, and yeah, it's pretty tanky. It's pretty tanky. It's good stuff though. Like energy shield is also good, but it's yeah, once that thing goes off, man, you're in danger. That's all I gotta say. Anyway, Wind does not have a retest up on YouTube. However, I have it up from season 7 or season 6, and it's almost just as strong. If you want to see how strong this build is in general, check out that demo that I have from the previous seasons. It's pretty much the same thing. It's just a little stronger. That's all. And I think now it's in the realm of the gods. Um, Arctic Blast and Hurricane. Yeah, there's not much that it gets stronger than this. It's about as strong as it can be. Arctic Blast, Hurricane. So it's a lot of sitting sometimes to cast Arctic Blast or waiting for the Hurricane to kill things, but it kills things very fast. So it's still like a solid build. I think they tried to make this uninterruptible this season, but I didn't see in the patch notes whether or not they succeeded. I tested it and it didn't look like it worked. So I don't think that's actually a thing. If it was a thing, it might have even moved up a third of a tier, but I can't confirm it, and there is no way to confirm this. So it's pretty much that simple. It's a little bit hard to survive with the model that this build uses, standing still and things like that, but you can make it happen with some tankier options and blah blah blah. These builds did not change. Fire Druid, they didn't change at all, but they did get retested actually, so I did retest them anyway. And yeah, it's still nutty. Physical with Act 4 Mercenary, Infinity Staff plus Amplify damage plus fire and physical damage coming out from Volcano, Molten Boulder, and Armageddon rotations. That you just like this build, you're just gusting around and just blowing everything up. This is just a little bit less consistent because the damage is harder to aim in a lot of cases, and it's a little bit more random. Whereas this is just like a wall of instant death, so it's a little bit stronger. Whereas this is still one-shotting almost everything, so it's about the same strength in that regard. It's just the damage is a little less consistent, which slows you down a little bit. Noticeably, but that's about it. Yeah, so that's pretty good. And then obviously the pure fire versions, it just doesn't really compare to the physical versions. And these are separate from these because they require different synergies. So they have like different synergy trees, and they also have different like kind of build approaches. Like with this, you'd probably use like you'd use like Ravenlore or something. You could also use Ravenlore for this as well. So it kind of depends. But you can also use, I don't know, Kira's. Yeah, there's just a lot of stuff you can do. It's pretty good. At any rate, they're strong builds. They can operate to some degree on a budget even without Infinity and stuff like that, because they do 2 types of damage. You just gotta you're gonna have to finagle the gear, maybe use all outers, things like that. It's gonna not be super effective though compared to some other approaches on a budget. Getting those infinities in on some of these builds are pretty insane. Wind does not need infinity. You can use something as simple as a Wild Witch string bow to cast amp on your Act 1 mercenary instead of Wrath, and you'll be crushing it on Wind. So that's why the budget's got 2 check marks there, because it's pretty strong on a budget once again. That's the differences. Shape-shifting tree, this is what we do. So shape-shifting tree, no chains to shockwave. It's mostly the fact that you have to kind of stand and cast it, and you're also in bear form, so you can't gust in bear form. So you can still run around really fast, though. So it's surprisingly fast, I think. A lot of people don't realize how strong shockwave is. It's very strong, though. But that's the only thing that slows it down, maybe compared to S tier builds. And you can see here it's pretty good. Definitely flattens monsters less HP a bit easier, and budget, it's good. You can make some kind of budget version of this work. Once again, you could use like Wild Witch string bow as well, but it's not going to be as effective without like all your gear as something like Wind Tornado, because it's just such a strong skill. Sometimes the strength of a skill itself, I mean, like is obviously it helps out the budget situation in a lot of cases, but sometimes it's like a reverse feedback too, and the fact that it works on a budget also kind of reinforces just how good the skill is. So it's a dual, it's a two-way relationship sometimes between those two things, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, All right, so let's talk about rabies. So there was a mechanical change to rabies, I think, in season 5 or season 6. And, like I said, once again, mechanical changes are the highest tier of changes, period. And this change made the spread speed of the rabies like 2 or 3 times faster. And this skill always had a ton of damage. The problem is that it always spread too slowly. So what would happen sometimes it would spread slowly, and it spread so slowly that the monster might even die before it like spread to the next monster, because it was taking so long to like spread and do damage. So the monster would die before it could spread. And it was okay, it was like maybe an A tier build, a B tier build. I don't remember what it was like back in those days. But when they did that mechanics change, all of a sudden all of that damage now is like coming like a tsunami at like every monster. And it had like a gazillion damage. And group mapping, I mean, this is a solo mapping tier list, right? Mostly taking into account solo performance, right? Which is what I think most people do anyway, but obviously there's some different considerations for group mapping. But like in group mapping, this build would destroy as well. Like in P8, it had so much damage, it was still destroying. It was probably like triple plus for group mapping. It was that insane for like one season, I think in season 6. They started nerfing it last season. There's been like in closed betas, there's probably been about 7 rounds of nerfs on this skill. And nothing they are doing to try to nerf this skill when it comes to the high-end gear is actually affecting how good the skill is or how fast it can clear the monsters. As long as the monsters are still able to die in one shot with all of the damage nerfs they have done, it doesn't matter because it spreads fast enough to clear absolutely everything. And all you have to do is run around at max speed and rabies, and then the whole group dies. And you can just leave them behind. Your loot filter will catch anything if it drops, and you just keep going. It's just an insanely fast build. And all the damage nerfs, I've tested them all. It's still performing at literally top speeds. It's still crazy strong. Doesn't matter how many times you nerf it unless you change the mechanics of the skill again. Unless they make the damage so low that it can't one-shot things in players 1, and at that point, that skill will be completely dead. It'll go from like S to C or something like that in an instant. So it's not happening though. Throne of Insanity, River of Blood, it's not happening. It's still one-shotting everything. It's one-shotting cow packs in Blood Moon. It doesn't matter. It's still one-shotting them fairly quickly too. Despite all the damage nerfs. It's lost probably another like 16k damage this season. And it's gone, I think, now from like 90k to like, I don't know, like 45k, 40k if you're using Grief. I think you guys get the idea, but like, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter because the skill is just that strong. It's so ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, maybe at some point this skill will come down. Maybe. Haven't seen it yet though. It's still insanely strong in season 8, barring any last minute changes. Wolf Bear Fire Claws. Oh yeah, by the way, I should mention I do have demos for Fire Druid in last season. Let's see, I have Arctic Blast from last season, Bear Shockwave from one of the 2 previous seasons, Rabies from. I have a full guide on that because I actually made that during the season in I think season 6. So if you just want to know how to build this thing, you'll learn how to. It won't be that insanely strong, but it will still be insane. So I have got demos and guides up on YouTube. They're all demo guides at this point, so they all include how to build the characters. Well, they're not just demos anymore, so they're like quick guides basically. It's like it's like my version of a quick guide. 10 to 20 minutes. There you go. All right. So you got Fire Claws. Fire Claws. Fire Claws was buffed a lot last season. This is a carryover from season 7. I think I have a demo of it from last season. If you want to see how strong it is demoed, and there's a mini guide for it, I think, from last season. It is very strong. They finally made the AoE do a ton of damage, and it's a lot of fun. Fire Claw is a great build. Totally recommend it all the way around. Oh yeah, one thing to mention is that Rabies can become insanely tanky and has insane survivability easily. Shockwave can become insanely tanky as well. Bear builds typically can, but this one in particular even has like stun and whatnot, so it's pretty insane. This one, yeah, you just need like to slap on a shield, max block, put on some negative res, and put on Plague Bearer or something, and or a Grief, and it's just like destroys everything. And Jalal's is tanky as well. Too many good, easy tanky items to budget. You can see the rest of these builds, though. You know, they're kind of decent in the hardcore budget categories for sure. They're just decent, though. It's exclamation S8 tier list if you guys are trying to access the tier list. I do, as many of you guys that want to access the tier list if you want, it's right here. It's free to the public. It will be up as a link on the YouTube video, of course, as well, in addition to the timestamps. You can get it there. Maul is just kind of clunky. You know, it just doesn't run as fast, and it's just a lot clunkier compared to Fury, but it still can become tanky, and it's fun, and it does a ton of damage. One thing we tested, so Fury got nerfed this season, so no big surprise, right? The strongest Uber killing build in the game got nerfed, but once again, I don't know what it is about Druid builds that they're extremely resistant to nerfs. It's going to take more than some damage number nerfs, which is what they've been doing to Rabies and Fury. In the case of life and damage, I think you lose like 300, 400 life now on a Fury Druid, but it still has a ton of life. Still has a ton of survivability, still moves insanely fast with Feral Rage, and it still crushes absolutely everything, even with the Fury Synergy nerfs. It's still crushing Fortified Maps, regular maps, whatever. In Fortified Maps, this thing looks amazing. Of course, obviously, it's great for Ubers as well, which is, you know, over here in the tier list infographic, but still, you guys can see that as well. I don't see any problem with still using this build for practically any function in the game. And yeah, there's definitely budget versions of it available that you can definitely use. Janky ass weapons like Warlord's Trust, for instance, or a humongous giant axe. You just upgrade them a couple times or one time and go to town. Hardcore. Yeah, you know, you can, even though these builds typically use two-handed weapons, they just have a ton of life, so as long as you get some DR and res and sustain, you'll be fine. You will be fine. I did try a different build this season, so I tried a new build, actually, which, actually, I don't even know if I have this listed properly in that new section. I'll have to do that. But yeah, this one... Yeah, I don't think I have this listed as a news build. This thing has better AoE and actually seems to perform insanely well, even not against Fortified. We're talking about just normal maps because the AoE massively increases. You max out all the Twister synergies as well, and you get Fury boosted, and you get all the Twister procs on your build. And this thing has a great delivery mechanism. You can even use Innocence as well for the Blade Shield. To proc it on top of that, and it just procs so many times, and it just like overwhelms the monsters. It's not as direct of an approach as something that also uses Gust and just jumps and jumps and kills things with way higher damage on Twister and Tornado, but it still works, and it increases the AoE of the build, making it better in non-fortified maps and making it just as good overall. It's really, really cool. And Maul got a little bit tankier. That's about it. So I feel a bit better about playing it on hardcore. I don't even know if I would have recommended it on hardcore before, but now I would. It got more defense on it. It's kind of cool. That's about it though. No damage changes. It's still a little clunkier compared to its wolf cousin. But yeah, that's basically it. All right, actually, real quick here. I actually do not. I I don't have that here, even though it is a new build in Season 8. I guess I forgot it. Wow, I am bad. That's bad. I just noticed something. You know, I try to make sure, Fury, Twister proc, there we go. That's fun. Definitely fun. We'll fix this real quick. Here we go. That's actually the strongest build, so there you go. Fun stuff, very fun stuff. Stronger builds are stronger. What a surprise. By the way, chat, you guys can ask questions, but there will be a question and answer session at the end. So if you guys do stick around till that point, we will be able to answer any questions. So hopefully we can get to that. What is the strongest proc build? It's actually listed here, I think, under the procs. So faux proc Paladin, I think, is the strongest proc build, according to my testing. If you want to proc Innocence, then that's all you really want to do. It says new in Season 8. It actually gives you a nice graphic here for that, because most of those, once again, are new this season because they didn't exist before. So, yeah, fun. Anyway, technically, yeah, this is a new variation of the build on the tier list, and I didn't include it. I should have. Anyway. Summon Creeper. So that's actually 10 new builds, not 9. Alright, Summon. Alright, so Summon did get nerfed this season. It did. This will affect its early game a little bit, but probably not much, because what it appears like is it's mostly affecting the late game. They nerfed the Ravens. They nerfed the Raven damage, which definitely is making it look like, even with max gear, it's making it look like it's doing lower damage quite a bit. But also, just adjusting to more builds getting stronger, it seems to be getting slower in comparison. The thing about Summon is that it's insanely reliable as a mapper. And obviously it's one of the best starters, and it's great at Ubers, which is reflected in other parts. Remember, this is just mapping. That's all it matters. This is just the mapping tier list. That's all it's rating it on, is mapping. It's slow. That's all it is. It's just slow. No matter what you do, you know, you can telestomp stuff. You cannot telestomp stuff. You can have bigger auras so they move faster. It's still slow. You can have all the auras. It's slower. It's decent. It's decent. Clear speed still, but it's slow. Slow comparatively. Hardcore, you might have to make a couple of small adjustments just to make sure you don't take too much damage. While you're tele-stomping or moving around. But the thing about Summon Druid, though, is that Summon Druid is never going to clock amazing speeds. It's the lazy build. And if you don't, you know, if you're doing something else on the side, or you don't want to pay much attention and still farm things, this build literally farms itself. Farms for you. And the other great thing about this build is that you practically need no gear whatsoever. This is a build that is technically capable of mapping on day 1. You're gonna have to do more casting of your summons, but technically it is. You just have to get maybe a little bit of plus skills from some LOD farming, maybe some summon, and you're pretty much good to go. Get like maybe 25 skills, and they'll tank good enough. It'll take a long time for them to kill things. You know, you can use Wild Witch Stringbow as well, just really simple basic gear. Obviously, the other thing is, like, once you get Alders, like, it's a really strong build, even without, like, really strong items. Just need full Alders. This build's insane on a budget, so it's really strong, and of course, it says nothing for its LOD farming capabilities. So, once again, late game mapping, this build is definitely slow compared to most builds on the tier list, but that's understandable. I think it needs to be. I think the fact that nerf kind of hit it a bit, and the fact that it's also been readjusted, it going down 2/3 of a tier since last season makes sense. It doesn't have that crazy late game damage, and that's fine for the mapping, because it's just so broken on like every other scale, so it's okay if it's slower. That's all it can do. Well, it's just not the best for late game mapping. So you want to play another build if you want to map quickly. That's all there is to it. Um, tier 3s, you really start to see the slowdown for sure. Like tier 1s is actually not even bad. That's what I mean by these 3 check marks here. Like you can go into a tier 1 map and you don't need any gear at all and it breaks stuff. It's crazy. Poison Creeper. Poison Creeper, this is a carryover from the buffs from last season. It's still trash, but yeah, you can actually kind of clear with it though. You can. If you want to do the tentacle memes, there you go. Tentacle memes are still fun. If you're not in my chat, you might not understand that reference, but yeah. Fun stuff. All right, so this is a case of a build that already kind of used all these proc mechanisms on striking because it was a Zeal build. So Zeal Druid now has Innocence though, and that proc on top of the Zeal now procs these things a ton. And you are going to be constantly procking Molten Boulders and Firestorms, and it does a ton of damage. As long as you get those items, Hellmouth, Innocence, Phoenix, Destruction, and then obviously Ferocity because you're a Zeal Druid. So, yeah, it's pretty good. This went from viable to solid, like strong. Like it's actually crushing packs of monsters. The main issue with this build seems to be survivability. I don't recommend this on hardcore. Also, it's extremely expensive. So you're definitely not doing that on a budget. So there you go. I do have a demo for this build up on my YouTube though for season 8, so make sure to check that out. Of course, I also have a guide for Summon Druid, I think from season 5, since this build never changes much except for a small damage chains once in a blue moon. The build is probably still 100% relevant. Assassin builds. We are out of the Druid builds. Done talking about them. Here we go. All right, so there's like 2 classes that probably received the most changes this season that were really impactful. And that was the Assassin and that was the Paladin. All the other classes, they received some pretty significant changes here and there. The Amazon almost received nothing of significance compared to every other class. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at here. So it's pretty good. All right, so Assassin builds. Assassin builds. All right, this is a carryover. No changes to Chain Lightning Sentry. It's just a slower version of some of these other builds, especially once you get to tier 3 maps. You really see it start to slow down. Remember though, a lot of these builds, even though they're not S tier, function very well in tier 1 maps, and this is why they work on a budget potentially. It can be hardcore. Budget isn't only talking about tier 3 mapping, it's talking about whether it can map at all on a budget. So this is the only category here that is referring to potentially not tier 3 strength. The rest of these are all about tier 3 strength testing. Hardcore in general, can it survive in those harder maps? Can it survive in maps, period? Hardcore is kind of like a medium ground between like tier 1 and tier 3. This is only referring to tier 3. Obviously, the tier itself is tier 3 testing, but budget kind of refers to whether, how good it is at just mapping with limited gear, period. So that's all there is to it. Any kind of maps whatsoever. Shockweb and Death Sentry though, so we have a tier there as well. We got that one. It's looking pretty solid. That's still no change this season, but yes, you can just throw Shockwebs out and blow them up with Death Sentry. That's a potential build. Not insanely strong, but it's a pretty cool approach if you want to try something innovative. This build literally hasn't changed at all this season. Wake of Fire, Wake of Inferno. No nerfs, no buffs. It was still insanely strong last season. It's still insanely strong this season. I think it's been insanely strong since season 6 when they buffed the radius again. Once again, a mechanics change. So like Wake of Fire has an interesting history. It was super OP back in like season 2, season 3, and then it got its radius nuked and the number of charges nuked, and then it kind of fell quiet for a bit, and then they buffed the radius of it again, its effective radius, which once again is another mechanics change. And then guess what? It's OP again, but it may be not as OP as in season 1 or season 2 or 3, which is why it's not standing above every build, but it is insanely strong, insanely good on a budget. You don't need Infinity to run something like Torahant Jungle on this. You definitely don't. Obviously, if you want to run a tier 3, you do, but it works really well. It's obviously slower, but it will still work. Don't need Infinity, just does a ton of damage. Infinity, of course, will make it the S plus build that it can be, but you know how it goes. It takes a little bit to farm that. Hardcore, you know, it's just slap on a Gurk, slap on a Storm Shield. Even the new weapon block, which uses parry now instead of block as of season 8, it's just really good to get a lot of builds strong for hardcore, especially if you use like DR elsewhere in the build. So you can even go a 2-claw approach again as of season 8, which is why you don't see a single assassin build with an X on hardcore. Not even one assassin build. I'll repeat it. There is one druid build because it's really hard to make something that requires 5 different items tanky when none of those have any survivability stats. I mean, one has sustain, but that's about it. Go down here though, and then you see literally no X's in the hardcore column. Any assassin can be made good for hardcore, and there's tons of assassin builds that excel at hardcore. Things that are constantly freezing enemies, things that are you know, doing all the you know, obviously being able to stand back or stand forward with tanky abilities, eviscerating monsters very quickly. Things that stand back like this and kind of keep monsters stuck. You know, things like this that have insane sustain and insane survivability while having tons of damage, which is typical of whirlwind type builds. So yeah, things like this, really good. It's really easy. I thought I just wanted to talk about that real quick. Assassin is a great choice if you're new to hardcore. You'll make a build that's very tanky pretty easily, and it doesn't take much to do it. Alright, so yeah, Wake of Fire, insanely fast clear. Just run ahead and cast a, you know, Wake of Fire, things will die behind you. Just keep running. Very fast. Running, teleporting with Enigma, yeah, it's good stuff. Fire Blast. I should also mention that once again, for people that are new to PD2, that the standard types of traps like Wake of Fire and Chain Lightning Sentry and things like that do not have Elemental Pierce anymore on PD2. So any facets, the negative res will not work. Only the percent damage works, and only auras work and curses. So lower res will help, conviction will help. But we've gone through a lot of iterations of these mechanics changes, but negative enemy res does not work on these anymore. But it doesn't need to, because Wake of Fire is just insane. Anyway, here we go. So Fire Blast, you can still just kill things with Fire Blast. It can clear AoE, and it can clear, you know, very tanky packs, but it's limited in the speed that it travels and, you know, how hard it hits. It's pretty cool though. This is a carryover from a previous season though. It's not it's still okay. It's still where it is. Hasn't changed. Blade Fury is honestly looking a little bit better this season. I think it received a small buff overall, but overall it's about the same. It's about the same. It's mostly limited by its mechanics. You got to stand perfectly still. It actually works best with not claws, which is odd enough. Something like Reaper's Toll is really good because you're constantly casting amp. But it's a solid mapping approach though. It crushes maps. It crushes tier 3s even. It does pretty good. And there are ways to make it safer as well, using like maybe Phoenix or Stalker's Coal, and it's pretty easy to do. All right, new build. Yay, we got a new build, and I am very sad to say I actually forgot to make a demo of, well, there's a few reasons I forgot to do this, because they kept changing the skill over the course of the beta. I was able to retest it, but I didn't make a guide and demo for it. But it is a new build, and you can just use Dragonflight to tele into the monsters, and just cast a couple of Blade Sentinels, and then as far as you can in front of you, and everything dies in front of you, teleport to the next pack right out in front of you, and do the same thing. It's pretty darn fast. Pretty darn fast. At one point in the beta, it was super broken. It was like it was actually the strongest build in the game at one point in beta, but they figured it out. It was bugged, so it was doing way more damage than intended. It was like instantly one-shotting like everything, and you could just like even without like the craziest gear too. It's kind of pretty nuts. But no, it went back down to earth once they lowered the AoE, and then they made the damage normal again. So all that stuff is fine. All that stuff is perfectly fine. So it's all good. It's very, very strong though. Very, very strong. I like it. It's not like one of the strongest builds though. Without that huge AoE it had at one point in the beta, it isn't like that crazy. So you have to like throw them in some different directions, but it's very good. And it's actually a build now because it has its own bonus AoE. So it's not like it's a weak skill you would only use against single targets like it was last season. It's actually a skill that has AoE when you send it out and clears maps. So that's why it's now separated from Blade Fury. So it's its own build now. It has its own designation. As you can see here, it's new in Season 8. Everyone say hi to Blade Sentinel Assassin. Hi, Blade Sentinel Assassin. It is a new build. Okay. There we go. Martial arts tree. All right, very cool. Yeah, so yeah, they changed the mechanics on the skill itself. They gave it more AoE, gave it more damage. It's looking nice. It's still, yeah, there was one point in the beta when it's absolutely busted, but it's not anymore, so don't expect that. Martial arts tree. This thing right here is looking really strong. And now Dragon Claw could even be used. And I think the best use of Dragon Claw, so if you guys don't know, Dragon Claw was changed to where now it will proc the same charge twice. It'll proc them all twice. Depending on where you do it, and it will do a lot of extra damage. Now, Dragon Claw is a little clunky frame-wise, so you might not want to always use it. But against like tougher monsters that have a lot of HP, you could consider it on a lot of these elemental builds here. Because it's very strong. Specifically Phoenix Strike, because you have so much AoE on this ability. Once you get to that third charge of Phoenix Strike, if you expend it with Dragon Claw, instead of just pressing Phoenix Strike or spamming Phoenix Strike, you'll often get a lot more damage. So if you're finding yourself lacking damage, that Dragon Claw change is really good for just allowing more budget mapping in general. Once you get really good gear, you might find yourself not using Dragon Claw much at all anymore, but that's kind of where it's at. Dragon Claw is actually useful now, like just weaving it in between your normal skills, which is really cool. Just wanted to like mention that when we talk about this tree down here. Anyway, Phoenix Strike is still looking absolutely formidable. With retesting, I think I realized this build is absolutely crazy strong. It freezes everything. They nerfed the freeze duration again this season, so that's like the only change they made to this skill directly. But the thing is as long as it freezes for any duration, unless it's like maybe 0.1 seconds or something, it freezes just long enough for them to die. So everything will die from the chaos ice shards or whatever they're called. I think that's what they're called. And everything gets frozen. Everything dies instantly. It does multiple types of damage. You'll never run into immunity problems. It smashes everything. It works well on a budget. You don't really need infinity because once again, it does multiple types of damage. So in tier 1s and tier 2s, you really just need some basic gear, and it will do damage. It will crush things. Once you get infinity, this build becomes insane. It's definitely one of the strongest builds in the game. I definitely say it's a top 15 mapping build for sure. It's not in the top 10, but it's really close. If you want to play an assassin, martial assassin, it's still the best in the tree. So check that out for sure. Cobra Strike got buffed directly. The damage got buffed, and you can feel it. Those monsters are falling. They're getting flattened by Cobra Strike now. It's not quite as much survivability. The consistency isn't as high as the Phoenix Strikes. AoE is also a tiny bit lower, so it's still not quite as fast, but it does a ton of damage. And there's a lot of maps that just can absolutely flatten very quickly with good mobility with Dragonflight as you just move between packs and you hit them up. So that buff, I've definitely upgraded it into the S tier. We're definitely looking at a top 25 mapping build now in Cobra Strike. So it's a very fun build if you want to try it out. Fists of Fire. Fists of Fire got buffed as well. It actually got buffed towards the very end of the closed beta. So I actually got to test it, which is great, but I almost didn't. But we actually did, and it's feeling a lot better with those damage number buffs, actually. It felt like it was a little lackluster. It was A- last season. But now it's actually crushing really hard. It's maybe not quite as consistent, and there's delay on meteors a lot more so than things like Cobra Strike, so it's still a little slower. But it's like, I don't know, it just crushes. And I mean, you still got your weapon blocks, and you still got budget options too you can use. They even buffed Radaman's Sphere, which is a budget option. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do if you Venom is pretty cheap as well instead of Plague Claws. This build definitely likes Plague Claws, so one way or the other though, strong, very strong. Good option for hardcore too. Arguably, Cobra Strike is like a I almost want to say this is also like double check mark here, but I don't know. The survivability isn't as consistent as the cold build, so it's kind of hard to say. Anyway, you can make some very easy modifications to make it even tankier if you want, so it's pretty easy. Could be nice. It's got great sustain though, great sustain. And then Claws of Thunder didn't change this season. It's still a beast build. It's still massively beast. It's one of those sleeper agents for sure. Not too many people play this build, but it's crazy strong. And it does a lot of damage. And builds that don't have a lot of lightning resistance get flattened. I made it to 99 on hardcore with with this build in one season. It hasn't been changed since. So still just as strong. It's a beast. All right, we've got we haven't gotten to the Necro ones yet. Just remember, guys, you can access the tier list yourself. The link will also be in the video. So you guys definitely have that ability to do. All right, Blades of Ice. So this build did get buffed. It got buffed along with Fists of Fire. It got its Synergies buffed directly, which is pretty cool. And I ended up bumping it up a third of a tier because of that. It does seem like it's one-shotting a lot more monsters. The AoE is still pretty painful, but I don't know. I kind of liked it in Fortified Maps. It's not nearly as fast as some other Fortified builds, but it's there, and in hardcore it's super safe. You're constantly freezing everything. It's not like Phoenix where you're mostly freezing everything. No, you're constantly freezing everything. If you want a really solid build that does one-shots monsters and maps once you get a full build, Blades of Ice is definitely looking solid. I don't know. It's finally, I would say, in the strong and balanced tier, just barely. It's killing things fast enough in Fortified Maps. If you want a great Fortified mapper that won't die in hardcore, that's a great choice. Tiger Strike, no changes this season. For mapping, it's clunky. It can be used for single targets like bosses, but it's not even one of the strongest approaches. It's okay. It kills things. There's ways to make it do damage. It at least has some AoE now as of a couple seasons ago. It's okay. Fortified mapping is pretty much what you'd want to do with it, though, for sure. Limited AoE. Dragon Tail or Talon. Limited AoE, but literally kills everything in one shot, even in Fortified Maps. It's super strong, Dragon Tail. This is what I think I want to do this season. I want to make either this or I might do like Two-Handed Zeal. I don't know at some point, but I want to make a Dragon Tail assassin that just only does Fortified Maps. It's really strong in Fortified Maps, so this is one of the fastest Fortified mappers, I'd say, period. which is why it's S minus. It doesn't not nearly that strong like AOE wise in normal maps, but yeah, that Fortify is definitely boosting that score for sure. Budget though, this is not a budget build. Dragon Tail kind of sucks until you get gear, so that's one of the problems. Kind of does, at least in maps it does. It's gonna be kind of painful otherwise. Hardcore though, yeah, you can make anything work in hardcore. Mind Blast, Psychic Hammer. This thing has been changed to full 100% physical damage again. That doesn't really change its tier though. It was just as strong. I like that change though because now Psychic Hammer actually has a purpose again. So it's been added back to the skill description. It was just Mind Blast last season, so there you go. So now the build is Mind Blast, Psychic Hammer again, and it's 100% physical damage as of Season 8. I have a demo of this build, I think, from Season 6 or Season 7 if you want to see how good it works in maps on my YouTube, so check it out. I should also mention, like, Cause of Thunder, I have full demo build. Fist of Fire, I think I have a demo of from a previous season, but it wasn't as strong. It's still good, though. Phoenix Strike, Cobra Strike, and Claws of Thunder, I actually have Season 8 demos for. So we have new demos for these builds if you want to see those in action. Let's see what else. Yeah, that's pretty much it, honestly. You know, I might even organize the timestamps this time by class, instead of tree, which might annoy people, but I kind of go over multiple things all at once. There's a lot of things to go over. All right, anyway. Shadow Disciplines. I might be a bit lazier this time. But it's not lazy. It's because it's like I'm going back and forth sometimes to different builds and talking about different things. Mind Blast, Psychic Hammer, A+, looking good. All right, Blade Dance. I did a feature of it last season, I believe. So there's a Season 7 demo of it. It got the Venom rebuffed to where it was when I did the demo last season. So now the demo is accurate again from last season, basically. And this thing is busted. So they rebuffed Venom basically to where it was because they compensated for the fact that they got rid of the bug. And so there's a bug in it that, like, you know, causes damage to be doubled. They got rid of it in Season 7, and then they doubled it again. So it's just as strong. That means all versions of this build, including, you know, using the Venom Rune Word for Poison Strike, which I should specify maybe is Venom. Yeah. And, you know, definitely some other things. So, like, there's a bunch of different builds. I mean, these builds are kind of clunky and don't do tons of damage. Like some of the ones down here, they could be good for fortified maps, though. They're actually not terrible. And then Blade Dance is just nuts. So Blade Dance is one of the strongest builds in the game, especially, it already was last season, I think, even with the nerf. But with the Venom buff again, it is crushing. They nerfed Chaos, and I tested it after they nerfed Chaos this season. They nerfed the ED on Chaos in the end. That's what they decided to do. It still can be indestructible. And that doesn't do much, honestly. Like, it just has so much poison and physical damage. It's better than normal Whirlwind. So if you can get a Chaos Sin going, obviously it's got tons of sustain. In addition to the fact that it can get, like, block on this stuff as well. So it's like a Whirlwind with block and just as much sustain as a Barb. So and it does just as much, if not more, damage in most situations. So yeah, it's in the top 10, as you can see. Blade Dance is definitely a force of nature this season. You might want to consider making one. The main weakness of this build, though, is, as you can see, it requires high-end rune words. So specifically double Chaos or Chaos Fury, something like that. So you're not making that on a budget. It's not happening. But you once you get to that build, though, it's pretty insane. All right. Do you know if they got rid of the Cobra Tiger Strike bug? Oh, you mean the one that increases the radius or makes the leech insane? I think they did. Which season did they get rid of that one? I don't know. I don't know. There's still a thing where Tiger Strike will increase, like, the radius of, like, Blade Dance in some cases, or just increase the AOE of some of these abilities in general. But I think there was another specific bug they did get rid of, and that might be the one. I don't know. Yeah, yeah, no. Yeah, so Chaos is indestructible. They just nerfed the ED on it, but it really doesn't matter. Like I tested it after they reduced it. It's the same. It's broken. It's broken again, kind of like it was so there was a time in the season 7 beta where it was broken, and then they fixed the Venom bug, and then it was still broken, but it was only S tier. It was like and now it's more broken, so it's like it's back up to the GG broken status for sure. I've tested a lot of Blade Dance in the last couple seasons because they keep messing with it. No, you could put 2 points in a Cobra, and the third hit would give you 3 points in a Tiger. Ah, yeah. Yeah, that's right. That might still be a thing. I'm not actually sure. I did play around with Tiger Strike with Cobra Strike, though. It looked like it was making it even stronger. I don't even know if I did that in the demo, but um, that's yeah. Yeah, Cobra Strike is very strong. There's a reason why it's like S tier anyway. It's mostly at this point limited by how fast the animations are and not the amount of damage it does when it comes to how strong it is. So no matter what, even if you use that or don't, this is one of the reasons though that Cobra Strike is one of the top Uber killers. Something you just mentioned, it might still be active, and this is probably why this is the case. I mostly researched this stuff, so that's kind of cool. It's kind of cool to notice that as well. See, I learned things from chat too. Chat, some people specialize. I test these builds a lot, but some people specialize like in one particular build, and they know like these little fun quirks about them that even I don't know, which is interesting. That's cool. I always like learning from you, chat, though. What weapon and shield to use in Cobra? You can just use double claws, and you have block right now from the new weapon block parry skill with new scaling. You can use double claws, you can use double plague, you can use plague storm shield, you can use plague. I mean, honestly, you can just even use you could use like use a lot of things. You could use bar tooks. I don't know. Like there's a lot of things you can do. Cobra Strike is pretty liberal, honestly. But I'd say you want at least one plague though, because the plague is like really good for Cobra Strike in particular. So, all right. Anyway, Barbarian Builds. Okay. Oh yeah, because you were taking advantage of the Tiger Strike thing. See, at that point though, I would argue that it's not even Cobra Strike anymore. It's like Tiger Strike, but because that's what I do on Tiger Strike. But whatever. That's that's one way to do it. That's one way to do it, I suppose. um, well, the thing is though, is it's like a Tiger Strike that's actually using the power of Cobra Strike. That's a weird concept. I don't know if that's actually a thing. Huh. Well, taking advantage of a bug is one thing. So I also make guides and builds for D2R on Maxroll as well, if you guys don't know. And one thing on Maxroll, like if something is bugged and we know it's probably going to get fixed at some point, we might not recommend anything, or we might not even like cover the build at all sometimes when it's a bugged build, because we know at some point it's going to disappear. I don't necessarily specialize in bug exploitation, but I do know that if there are any bugs for anything, take advantage of them, man. You'll just make the builds even stronger. So, for sure. But yeah, like sometimes as a team though, for builds on Maxwell though, we just decide not to even cover a bugged build or a bugged mechanic because it's not intended. So it's kind of weird. Yeah, but see, that's the thing though, is that rabies, once again, when it comes to mapping speed, I mean, I don't know if that's what you're talking about, Cloudsidin. When it comes to mapping speed, Cobra Strike is Cobra Strike, so it has like limited AoE. You hit it once and then you move on, and you can kill stuff very fast. But the thing about rabies is like tag, you're it, and the whole screen is dead. So it doesn't matter if it does less damage. Um, That matters more for something like an Uber boss, so I can see why Cobra Strike is such a dominant Uber killer. Um, yeah, for sure. No, I could totally see the stuff you're talking about. Absolutely. If you take advantage of something like that for single target, that's gonna be nasty. All right. Anyway, so it's about like it's about moving it though. Yeah, exactly. No, that's why rabies is no longer like a single target build anymore. Like I think I even took it off all of the Uber killing builds for I did. Yep, it's oh no, there's still rabies on. Yeah, you could still use it for Rathma. That's true. Not declone though. Declone's hard because of the poison res of the skellies. Um, but yeah, no, they've nerfed the damage enough to where I think rabies isn't that great anymore for the single targets at all. But the Cobra Strike clearly is, so good shit. All right, there's a reason why it's listed elsewhere. This is remember mappings. This is late game mapping. It's just speeds and things of that nature. Not has much to do with that shit. Not really. Uh, it's just that they're better, my man. They're just better. Throw Barb is still listed in Ubers, I believe. It's still listed on my tier list. You guys are asking a lot of questions. I'm gonna move on, but keep in mind there will be a Q&A section afterwards where we go over all of the stuff that we go over. So, yeah, you're fine. You guys are fine. We're just yeah. Keep in mind that yeah, double throw is actually listed under all of the Uber bosses. So, yeah, it's possible. It's just not the strongest approach. That's all. Um, there's just better approaches, faster approaches, things that will get it done a bit easier. Um, it's definitely a good way to do it though. I think when they nerfed Throw Barb, what was it like last season? I think that's when its status as an Uber killer kind of fell a little bit. A little bit. But like they buffed it a little bit again this season, but it's mostly like number of bounces. So it's mostly its AoE clear, so it's a little different though. They nerfed the damage last season, so anyway. We'll go more into it though. Still pretty strong though. Yeah, they nerfed a lot of things for the throw barb. That's the problem. It's okay still though. Double swing frenzy standard. All right, so this build didn't change directly, but frenzy is still looking like it's a pretty strong and balanced build. And there's a lot of weapons now that you can use, such as buffed grandfathers as well. So it's looking very strong. It's mostly the mechanics and the frames of this skill that really make it suffer in terms of mapping clear speed, but that's it. Otherwise, it's like one-shotting almost anything it comes into contact with. Double flame bellows will do the same thing. This isn't the best use of flame bellows, but I tested this because flame bellows were granted attack speed in the beta, so I wanted to see if they can actually be put to use on something like frenzy, and they were able to. So you could do it with this as well, and it's just as effective. Still suffers from the mechanical limitations of the skill. That's what I'm going to term it a little bit, but it's still very strong. Whirlwind. So Whirlwind is absolutely crushing. We're seeing pretty strong results here. Very strong. Whirlwind is crushing. So Whirlwind still crushing with Reapers, still crushing with Steel Pillar, crushes with a lot of other things as well. Still doing good. It's not one of the very fastest builds anymore now. Like it used to be like towards the pinnacle, towards the top. You can argue that it still is maybe with some really absurd weapons, but that's about it. It's like it's still really fast. It's just not as fast as some of these other builds anymore. And it's still in the top 15 mappers. So standard Whirlwind is good. All right, one thing we should probably talk about before we get a bit further down is Deep Wounds. So Deep Wounds got a major fix this season where there was I didn't even know this when I was testing it last season, but there's a cap on it on the damage that the damage could not exceed a certain number, which would explain why no matter how much Deep Wounds I got, it felt like a lot of it did the same amount of damage. Which is why I was only B tier last season, like B- or something. I think I have it in one of the biggest movers, But now it just feels balanced. It doesn't feel OP. It doesn't feel like it's absurd to have this deep wound skill, but it seems like if you're lacking damage on your weapons, this is a really good approach. Like by itself, I was using pretty weak weapons, like really weak weapons, and all they have is this stat on it, and they're killing tier 3 maps. Not as fast as like just, straight up using a super weapon and crushing them in one shot, but they're killing them. You can hit them and move on, hit them and move on, and they will die. It's pretty solid. Pretty solid, like definitely A or A plus even, depending on, your opinion of how strong this mechanic is. But it means that like this season, I would actually recommend using this if your weapons are weak. If you can get some of this deep wounds damage, you can actually make your LOD clear, your early mapping clear quite a bit better. This is more of a commentary on the mechanic itself because multiple builds are listed here with it. But there you have it. It's actually, I'd say, pretty balanced. It's solid damage for sure. It's definitely not going to exceed the performance, though, once again, of just stacking damage. But it's strong. It's very strong. I kind of like where it's at now. It's kind of in a dangerous place if you buff it anymore because it might become a little out of control, especially consider how budget a lot of that deep wounds gear is. So as you can see, budget has got the double check marks under it because this is literally like the budget approach for damage. It's really good. Definitely recommend it this season. It's definitely different. So now when you go to Deep Wounds Whirlwind, you'll see a little bit less performance, but the performance is still really good. And all you do is just get an Ariox Needle or something, and you can Whirlwind with it, and it's literally clearing tier 3s that fast. It's pretty good. Solid performances, which is Deep Wounds, and obviously the weapon damage as well, but that's not as important anymore on the build because, like I said, these weapons are often that use this stat are often quite a bit weaker than really high-end weapons in terms of just their damage output. So like they're like a lot lower, but it's still fun. And on Whirlwind, you can always get tons of sustain. It's always easy to sustain on Whirlwind with just a little bit of leech and maybe some DR. Great for hardcore. It just, cuts through stuff. Dying is difficult unless you, stop whirling and mess up or it bugs up. I don't know. For the most part, it's really solid, so pretty good. That's what I mean. Deep Wounds is good. Deep Wounds is very solid. Double Flame Billows stack with Dragon Chest. They do, but oddly enough, because you have such a high level Holy Fire already, you don't really need Dragon Chest. They can also stack with Ormus, and they can also stack with Corpsemorn, believe it or not. So you can actually stack a bunch of things. We're about to get to that. So there's a new build here in town. So now you can use Sanctuary and a two-handed sword, which means that, oh, sorry, not Sanctuary, Asylum and a two-handed sword. So you can put 2 of these in a barb, and you can actually use the magic damage to shred. And this also shreds pretty well too. It's not that strong though, because it's not as high of a level as you can get from this, which is level 28 versus 20. So that's 16 more levels you can get from Flame Bellows compared to Asylums. That's a huge difference. Also, I think Holy Fire scales harder than Sanctuary. So yeah, it's a pretty big difference, but you can see, of course, that it's a possible approach. So I listed it here. If you want to have some fun with it. It's pretty good. I'm pretty sure it's under my new builds. It is. There you go. All right. Of course, we have, the Titan of last season's testing. So this has been around since season 6, but I think I didn't test it in season 6. I tested it in season 7. And then when I tested, I was like, holy crap, this is insane. And they buffed the Holy Fire aura damage itself this season, which further makes it even stronger. So it's just cementing its place on the top, basically. This thing just absolutely one-shots everything. You literally just, it just melts everything like butter. It's like literally slicing through butter with a steak knife, just straight down. This build is is nuts. It crushes everything. It's stronger than using ultra powerful weapons on Whirlwind, unless maybe your weapons are insane, and then it's maybe somewhat competitive. But I mean, it's a noticeable difference though, using the double flame bellow versus like a standard Whirlwind weapon. So pretty crazy stuff. And the you just stack fire LCs, just get that damage up. I have a demo of this from last season that is still 100% relevant gear wise. It's just a little bit stronger this season. It is one of the strongest builds in the game, and you can even make it sustain on hardcore really easily. And it's yeah, it's kind of nuts that a build like this, you know, you would think this is a meme build. It definitely has the flavor of a meme build. That's the funny thing. And it's one of the strongest builds in the game. That's just where it's at. The flame bellows are just absurdly OP when used with Whirlwind. Whirlwind is a great mechanical skill. It cuts through everything, unlike Double Swing Frenzy. So you cut through this with this, and it just, the damage just absolutely just tanks everything. Oh, it's good even with poor slams. It don't even matter. This is pretty insane. I do think it doesn't necessarily require infinity. I think do I have it as an X right now? That's maybe a mistake actually. I think this is okay actually. I'm gonna put a, technically it performs a lot better not on a budget, but it can work on a budget, sort of. I don't know why there's an X there. I should have one check mark on the budget for that one. Xylems are not flame bellows though. Those are very expensive rune words, so no. But you'll see though, all these deep wounds approaches are better on a budget, and like I said, there's a reason why. It's because you can use all these janky items, and as long as you max out the skill deep wounds and you have mastery skills, which are usually really cheap, and you have maybe some other jewels that you just randomly find, that mechanic does a ton of damage. I like how well they work on a budget. It's very good. And of course, double throw is great on a budget because you're a ranged skill, and it doesn't take insanely strong ranged weapons to do damage. So there's always these funny things as well to take into account. This season is impossible to be immune to amp. That's the case since season 7, Roland Hammer. That's the case since season 7. Warcry is S tier. For mapping, yes, I am 100% sure about that. I'll go over that in a second. Alright, double throw received a buff. It got more bounces. That also buffs the deep wounds approach as well, which is also buffed by the fact that deep wounds is now uncapped. You have, of course, more bounces, which means it's feeling a lot better even under the standard approach. And obviously, once you get a really strong weapon, I could see it being solid S tier. It's taken enough nerfs at this point to where I don't think it's one of the strongest, very strongest mappers, but it's definitely a top 20 mapper still. So double throw is looking stronger again this season. It's not looking as anemic as last season. Not like one of the best builds, but it's looking solid. Double throw, I like the buffs helping that out, by the way. This seems to be okay. So even though double throw, so I have a video of this. I have a season 8 demo and mini guide for double throw deep wounds. It's on YouTube. Even though it's not listed as the strongest version of deep wounds, which is Whirlwind, I think it is the strongest version of deep wounds compared to the skill itself. So you'll notice here that you have like a 2/3 difference here, and then you have like a 2/3 difference here. Well, this 2/3 difference here between the standard and the deep wounds version, I think, is like the smallest difference. And like it almost feels like double throw will do almost as good with deep wounds. It's pretty close compared to standard double throw. Double throw deep wounds is very good. I think if you're gonna want to use deep wounds at all early game, this might be your best shot. Which is really interesting to think, but it's true. I think it's the easiest one to execute. It's got it's got a lot of advantages. It's pretty nice. And obviously lacerators have the open wounds damage itself on it as well. It's got some natural strong weapons that are actually strongest for the build naturally that already have the deep wounds on it. So, and also one thing to mention is that amp does affect the deep wounds. Negative physical res, the monster's negative physical res matters for deep wounds. So having that constant amp from lacerators makes it really good. So I really like this, honestly. I really like this. I thought it was very good. I mean, the standard version is still crushing faster if you go like a really powerful weapon plus lacerator. But if you just have like just some random lacerators lying around or just something else, like it's pretty solid. Like you could use all kinds of basic options for that. All right, Bash, Stun, Concentrate. They did buff this, oddly enough, again this season. I hate testing this because I think it's dumb, but I have to retest anything that gets changed every season, at the very least. Obviously, I don't retest everything that doesn't get any changes, but I do a lot of that testing as well. But in the case of this, though, this one is just kind of trash. It kind of does fortified maps, sort of, kind of. It's viable. It crushes things in one shot. It has a lot of sheet damage. But that's about where the fun ends. It's just really clunky, making this do damage. No matter how you do it, taking advantage of the magic damage and concentrate, you could try using Asylum. You could try using just powerful physical weapons. It's just a little clunky is all. That's all there is to it. I would never use this on hardcore. You're going to die. Budget. No. If you want this to do any damage at all, you need some really strong weapons. Yeah, so that's the thing, is it's like I always say, Graph, Seeker of Power in the chat there. It's like I always say, mechanical changes are the changes that typically make the biggest difference when it comes to builds changing tiers. Damage changes might, make it fall like a third of a tier, at most like 2/3 of a tier. But sometimes mechanical changes will make it go up 2 whole tiers. So 6 1/3 of a tier. Sometimes they will. And that's what makes the difference. Like that's what happened to Rabies back like a couple seasons ago. Those mechanics changes are huge. They're absolutely massive changes. So yeah, they just big changes, man. They're big changes. Anyway, Berserk is looking good. It's actually looking even a little bit better now with the grandfather options. So some of the new weapons is making it even more effective. But kind of like Double Swing Frenzy, the animations are a little slow, and that's what holds it down for mapping. But it will crush fortified monsters pretty easily. Berserk, like Double Swing Frenzy, is more of an uber skill though. So once again, these ratings are all for mapping. You can map with them. You can. It's just not the strongest approaches. It really is. You save on the ED from 1 Zod, so you don't need a Zod rune anymore, which is pretty big because it repairs durability. And then they also boosted the enhanced damage on Grandfather as well. So you effectively almost have 100% ED boost on the new Grandfather. That's really big. And not only that, but it's more effective for Warcry now, because it now isn't 3 to 5 Warcry, it's 4 to 5 Warcry, which means it's a lot easier to get the stats you need on it. And with that being said, let's go on to Warcry. Warcry got retested again this season, and I think with better testing, I figured out it's still crushing face. It's absolutely smashing everything. I have full build guides for this because in Season 6, I used this and Whirlwind. I actually used the same character and just swapped out gear. I had a full set of Whirlwind and Warcry gear on Hardcore, and we got to 99 alternating those two skills, and it's about as fast either way, so that's why I did that, and it's still just about as fast either way. It received a minor nerf, I think, last season or the season before that, but it's still doing so much damage. You literally jump around with Enigma and you just flatten everything in like 2 casts, and then jump around, flatten everything in 2 casts. It does so much damage. There's nothing that's immune to you because you have maxed out Warcry on top of maxed out Battle Cry, so all the negative res. If anything, it's actually been boosted this season, which is why I boosted the rating of it, is because if you put Innocence on the Merc, some of these builds that use Reaper's Toll that jump into the monsters on the Mercenary has enough AR from your other stuff for the blade shield to actually hit. There is an AR check on it now as of season 8 on blade shield, which includes the new rune word Innocence for the meme builds. Anyway, you put Innocence and Reaper's Toll on the Merc. The Merc will now proc it from his blade shield as well as from hitting the monsters now. So you almost have 100% uptime on Amp the second you jump into a pack now with Warcry. So there's no question in my mind it's back up a third of a tier to S tier. It's one of the top 15 strongest mapping builds in the game. No doubt about that. It's not in the top 10. I don't think it is. It's, mechanically, it casts maybe one too many times for it to be up there. It's maybe a little too slow for that. But it crushes so fast that you really can't argue that it doesn't. And obviously it could do fortified or non-fortified. It doesn't matter. There's a lot of crazy builds that are really cheap as well that use, I think it's Orphan's Call set that gives it like 11 skills or something. So there's a lot of like budget builds for it as well that are just really cheap, like double Hodos. It's just really easy to do. Hardcore, it just becomes absurdly tanky because you have battle orders as a synergy. So it's pretty hard to kill this thing. I could almost put like 3 check marks if I made that a designation on hardcore on a Warcry. That thing is like, man, if you want a hardcore build and you're like a first timer, that's a good one. Dying is pretty tough if you build that right. Anyway, fun stuff. Yeah, so Berserk is it's an Uber killing build. So Ubers includes Uber Tristram, Rathma, Declone. Whenever I say Ubers, that's what I mean. Berserk is one of the top Declone Rathma killing builds. It's listed as that on my tier list in the separate infographic. This is the mapping tier list once again. So if the tier doesn't satisfy you, you're like, oh, but it kills Ubers. It's like, yeah, this isn't the right section for that. That's this section here. DH is recommended Uber Tristram. DH is recommended Declone killers. Recommended Rathma killers. So yeah, those are those builds. If I actually had tiers for those would be like S tier for that. They're just not great at the maps. Might not be that great. All right, so I have another build that I tested, so that I have a demo of actually. So on the Barb, which is a bow barbarian. I've never actually tested this build, but people have been playing it since the beginning of the mod practically. And yeah, I found it to be really solid. It's a meme for sure, but the clear speed's not bad. It's not bad. It's decent. It's noticeably weaker than higher up builds, but it's solid though. Multi-shot, that thing does damage. It's very tanky. I kind of liked it. Honestly, the bow Barb, even though it can't have a shield, is okay in hardcore actually, because you can actually get a lot of tankiness. I don't know why I put an X there. I think I was just thinking last night in a hurry that it's a bow build, and you can't tank up with it. Nah, not a Barb though. Barbs can tank up with that. That's fun. Barbs can get plenty tanky. I tested that and it felt very safe. Yeah, that's okay. You just got to make sure you get some gear to tank up a bit more on it. What's this one? Oh yeah, Wolf. See, I'm also kind of like doing a little bit of fixes here and there as I'm seeing them, as I'm looking really closely at it. I did a couple of passes over it last night, but it's never perfect the first time. Anyway, bow Barb, well, it's never perfect anyway, but there's definitely some subjectiveness here, but I really try to just go based on how fast it feels like we're going. I have a pretty good metrics for that, so it's good. Got a really good sense for it too. But bow Barb is not bad. Bow Barb's not bad. Wolf Barb is just clunky and slow, but it's tanky. If you want to do any of these like other alternative physical Barb builds, they're definitely a lot clunkier, but they do well in like Fortified Maps. And Zeal Barb, for instance, or Wolf Barb can be used for Uber type things, and they're quite strong actually because you're very tanky. You do a lot of damage. They haven't changed really this season. Ferocity got a very tiny buff for some of the Zeal builds, which helps a little bit, but honestly it's pretty insignificant. It was like a couple points of Zeal or something. And they did buff Zeal to make it have its own ED, but It's per skill point, but it's not that great. It's like 40. You have 40 more AD on the Zeal Barb. There you go. Maybe 80 if you're lucky. It's not bad. You did Singer in season 1. Yeah, Singer is insane, man. Like, there's so many good builds. There's budget builds. There's crazy builds. Obviously, Double Grandfather is a build, especially if you get like FCR corruptions. I don't know. It's just, yeah, so much damage. Like, see, the tier 3 maps get crushed. Tier 1 maps get crushed with almost nothing. Basically easy. All right, so that's about it for those 4 classes. We got 3 more classes in the late game mapping tier list to get through, and then we're going to kind of go over some of these infographics so you guys can understand them. Things that haven't changed since season 7, I might not spend too much time on, but that's about it. And we'll be good no matter what, though. We'll be good no matter what. All right, I think we can see this pretty easily right now. Yeah, I'll move this a little bit here. There we go. All right, so Amazon builds. All right, so Amazon got the fewest, I'd say, like, significant changes period this season. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the Amazon because there's not a lot of interesting things going on in season 8. You got like dodge evade scaling reworked somewhat, and then they reverted it, and then so those changes didn't even really go through. And then I don't know, you had some like minor buffs to like fire arrow, which, you know, I think all of the arrow builds, honestly, you got minor buffs to magic arrow as well going through. So you're definitely seeing some buffs to those, which is pretty cool. That's kind of it though. Oh yeah, Fen got buffed a little bit, Jab a little bit, but Jab's build got destroyed when they messed up Headhunter's Glory. There is a build that worked really well with it for mapping, and it doesn't really work anymore, which is why it's down to C tier, where it should be after retesting this season. It's still great for like uber killing and stuff like that, but you have to use 2-handers though, or if you do use a 1-hander, it's fine because the amp will just apply to the uber Tristram boss or whatever, and it's fine if you. But nah, not for mapping though. Not for mapping. It's not nearly as consistent anymore because it doesn't do crazy damage. So ever since they knew Headhunter's Glory, that thing's down the toilet. And also, this is so. Remember how I said in the beginning of the overview here that that sometimes I make a mistake on how to test a build. That's one of those cases here for this one. I tested it wrong last season. It was only A tier. It got 0 changes this season, and now it's S-. You might notice that. That's because when you test it properly, you're supposed to kite a lot more of it and just let the monsters die behind you. I was playing it better. It was actually a mechanical error I was making when I was playing the build while mapping with it. And yeah, I was kind of just like overusing skills that I didn't actually have to use. It's crushing, man. The damage is nuts on this, but also it's very tanky because you usually use a shield. A lot of good budget options like Radamans and some cheap stuff like Titans. But yeah, honestly, not bad. So there's some good things looking like for the Zon. You know, you have your 4 strongest builds. You have Lightning Fury, you have Poison Javelin. Lightning Fury is like trash on a budget. Like, you really need good gear because otherwise it does no damage. Um, it literally doesn't. Once you have good gear though, it does a lot of damage, and you have good mobility, and it crushes stuff. So you go 1 point frenzy for throw, truck and toast. Yeah, so that you can stack up the attack speed, and so your movement speed's good as well. All right, that's a 1-pointer. That's a 1-pointer right there. Did I do a Blade Fury build guide? I don't know if I have. Maybe in season 6 So I always do demos and mini build guides. As of these last 2 seasons, 7 and 8, I know they're all mini build guides as well. I think in season 6 I just demoed them. I don't know. So I've actually been doing a better job at getting better information out to you guys these last 2 seasons, but um, that's how it is, though. That's how it is. You know, we're upgrading up in here, as you can see. Um, People have been asking me about budget and hardcore all the time. Hardcore doesn't really affect the tier because, you know, every build takes a damage loss when you have to play for hardcore for the most part. Except maybe like a couple builds that where they have the exact same build for hardcore and softcore, which is pretty rare. But anyway, like the tier isn't affected by hardcore, but I think it's interesting to show people, yeah, you know, there's some builds that are better than others, and then there's some builds that, I don't know, you play that on hardcore, you're doing it at your own risk, you know. It's it's pretty tough to make tanky. No matter how tanky you make it, it's so clunky, or it's not possible to make it tanky enough because, you know, there's other things that you have to have tanky enough while doing damage, that is, to never die. So, you know, sometimes there's like that, it loses that balance war between damage and survivability, and it dies, you know. So that's how it goes. Founded on season 5. Thank you, sir. Yeah, so I have almost everything. I have almost all of that stuff on my YouTube. So if there's like almost any build you have a question about, I have at least some kind of a demo or a guide of it on YouTube at this point. And in the last 3 seasons, there have been fewer changes. Last 4 seasons, including season 5, there have been less significant changes than in the previous 5 seasons or previous 4 seasons. So the second half of the seasons have received less significant changes to the builds in general, which means that a lot of those build guides are pretty close to what they should be, or they're, you know, almost identical still. There might be a couple changes here and there, you know, there's some small stuff, but nothing big. Nothing big, and you usually can figure it out with common sense. To be like, oh yeah, I remember this item exists now. It's like, okay, we'll just put that one on instead, and you know, we'll call it good. Poison Strike Necro should get double X for hardcore. Nah, there's no double X. X is fine. X means don't do it unless you know, you want to have a good time. I gotta say though, that build isn't as bad as it could be if you go defensive enough on it. It's just like you could get stuck on that build. Like it's it's dangerous. It's very dangerous. The Merc dies, you're gonna be having fun. Lightning Fury, yeah, no budget. Once again, this is kind of like Nova builds. Like Lightning Fury just doesn't do very well with that gear. It's very tanky though once you get it though. Lightning Strike. Lightning Strike is you know, it's got a pretty good balance. It could pretty much do everything. You could use Infinity and a Spear, but ever since they nerfed it, I think last season, where they nerfed the number of targets it can chain to, which is a mechanical change, it hurt it pretty bad. Like Lightning Strike used to be one of the top mapping builds. It used to be up there. Not really so much anymore. It's still strong though, and it's still great on. It's still decent on a budget, and there's budget gear you can use, and it's pretty good. It's A plus is no joke still, but it's not nearly as strong as it used to be. Um, a lot of zom builds are suffering from over nerfing, or other builds are suffering from over buffing, depending on your take on that. So, um, Poison Plague Javelin retesting this season. I made an error last season. This is the appropriate tier for the build. It's very strong. You kite everything, everything dies. It doesn't move as fast as rabies, obviously, but the damage is about the same, honestly. Obviously, the AoE isn't as effective as rabies either, but the damage, the one-shotting is still a thing, though. 100%. Very strong build. Running around. Jab, ever since Headhunter's Glory bit the dust. I don't think I tested this last season. I should have, and I tested it this season and found out, man, this is in a sorry state, even with even with them buffing Javelin and Spear Mastery, it didn't matter. At least for mapping, it is. It's really clunk, you know. It doesn't. You don't have enough amp up time. Like you used to have like almost 100% amp up time, and now you don't. Like it's, I don't know. It's bad. It's viable though, I guess. Fend keeps getting buffed, so it went up I think another third of a tier, maybe, or maybe it didn't. I don't remember. I think it did. It feels pretty good though. Like mapping with fortified, you're two-shotting almost everything. One-shotting some fortified maps. It's a tiny bit clunky. Like the animations are a bit slow, but the damage is definitely there. Really solid build for sure. Fend just keeps getting better and better and better. Remember to use Zere's Resolve for the Joust. You want to use Zere's on this build now for mapping. If you're going to map with Fend, it has Joust as of I think last season, and it makes it work like a Paladin. So it's just like a slightly clunkier Zeal. That's the best way to describe it. So make sure to take advantage of that. Bow and Zeal Paladin, that is. Like Zeal Paladin, not any of these troll builds, but like an actual, it's solid. And it's got good survivability, dodge, and evade, and it's got good tankage. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. Hello, hello, hello. Oh my goodness, man. Hey, thank you so much, guys, by the way, for all the support that's coming through. I turned off my my headphones, so none of the sound's going to be going through on that, but thank you, Globalists. Thank you guys for any support you're willing to give. This takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of hours to make these, so hopefully you guys enjoy and help support the stream and help support the effort. I love the PD2 community. You guys are, you guys are definitely, like, besides my old school LOD community, which I still have a lot of love for, definitely like the best reset community that I have for my channel. So I appreciate you guys for sure. Thank you guys once again. Yeah, buddy. Buddy. Logical Chaos coming out with the Prime as well. Yeah, those Primes are good. It's basically something you could do for free if you have it available. Absolutely. Thank you, man. Thank you for Xanifying yourself. The power of Xana is now with you. What were you saying, Alpine? I don't know. You're saying like it's like $10 for what? Oh, $10 for LOD. Yeah, you gotta buy it from Blizzard still though. They own the game. Just keep that in mind. This is just a mod that you can play for free on top of it. So full open wounds plus Grimward and 1 point barb leap attack. I was using Grimward also for bow barbarian, by the way, but I explained that in the season 8 build video for that. Still don't know how to skill. Leap attack, you just get the synergies mostly, and then you get like the mastery. If you want full open wounds leap attack, it's pretty solid actually. Like you can just use Measure Smiths or Ariox or whatever. You don't even need Grimward really, but you can use Grimward. Grimward is good. It slows you down a bit when you get enough damage though, so you only want to use Grimward when you're a bit weaker, I think. But you're 100% right about that. All right, sweet. Good stuff. Thank you guys. Thank you. Spam those eyes of Xana in the chat for all the supporters. Yeah, thank you, man. Hopefully you guys do appreciate it. Absolutely. Great stuff. Absolutely. We got it, baby. We got it. All right. All right. So bow skills, multiple shots, strafe. Ever since they reduced the dex scaling, these builds haven't been quite as strong, but I imagine if you get a really good crafted bow and things like that, these builds might be stronger than it shows here. They'll never be one of the top 10, but these are builds that can be very expensive to gear if you want them to be very strong, but they're still strong even without expensive gear, if that makes any sense. But they still are. There's budget options. It's easier to make strafe a budget build though, because you got things like Bariza you can use that are more effective on strafe that are just really cheap, and then like you can just chuck on an Atmas to make it powerful, whereas like something like multi-shot doesn't benefit from amp that much. And so like there's a lot of cheap options for amp, right? And so strafe does a better job at utilizing budget options. That's the main difference. Strafe is also a little bit stronger, so it's better against like fortified and things like that as well. Some of these are like old school meme build approaches. Definitely a lot of flying skills coming out, like foe and and Bone Spear, of course, by using them. They're not as strong as the basic approaches, but they look really cool, so they're awesome meme builds. Of course, one of the reasons why bow builds on an Amazon are okay for hardcore and maybe not on a Paladin is because you have dodge and evade, so you don't necessarily need a shield to be tanky. And also, well, Paladin has Holy Sword, but it only works for swords, so it wouldn't work for a bow anyway. And then the other thing is that you have Valkyries and you have decoys you can use. So there's a lot of defensive tools that the Amazon has that makes hardcore a lot more survivable on a bow build. Maybe you gotta modify some gear so you don't get one shot, but that's about it. Freezing Arrow also freezes everything. So Freezing Arrow is kind of busted. Freezing Arrow you can get full Mavinas as well, and it's busted and it crushes. It's still the strongest elemental bow approach in my opinion because overall it's the easiest one to get enough damage for and to execute. And it's just plenty strong. It's got crazy AoE as well. These also have crazy AoE, and arguably they can move a little bit faster through some maps. Cold Arrow, Fire, and Immolation, and Magic, especially with the buffs this season. I think some of these moved up, or all of these moved up from A to A plus this season due to some of those buffs and due to some of the one of the new rune words actually. So one of the new rune words is Hustle this season. So this is a good time to talk about Hustle. Hustle actually helps out these elemental bow builds quite a bit because one of the problems that they had is that they had problems getting enough attack speed while also having the negative enemy res from Conviction or from Infinity at their strongest. And so you would usually have to use like Fanaticism Mercenary just to have the attack speed frames. So you're hitting them fast enough for the bow build to feel good while also like, dealing a lot of damage. Now you can have both though. You can actually, have your cake and eat it too. So Hustle Armor enables some pretty cool interactions. Oftentimes it'll lower your base damage a little bit, but you'll get your full negative enemy res and you'll get full attack speed. So that's the main thing that helped out these builds, not the numbers. It's mostly the new rune word Hustle, actually, that helped these out. Hustle is not best on Freezing Arrow, and that's because of the scaling of the skill, but Freezing Arrow still uses the gear that it has. I tested all this season. Fire Arrow actually has a build demo for Season 8 even, a brand new one that you can check out. So you want to see maybe how Fire Arrow works in Season 8 with Hustle and all that stuff. You can 100% check that out on YouTube and then see how to build one of these really awesome mapping builds. A+ is not a slacking build. I mean, that's at the high end of strong and balanced. It's close to that OP zone, That's it's good stuff. Don't ever in any build that's like I'd say like A or higher, don't underestimate those builds, especially in like tier 1 and tier 2 maps. Remember to standardize the testing. They're all tested in tier 3s, but that doesn't mean that some of these builds won't totally crush it in lower tier maps. Absolutely. So just to make it to where like they're always testing against the hardest maps in the game because those are the ones that have the biggest experience bonuses or the biggest item bonuses and things like that. But when it comes down to it, well, the biggest bonuses to the map itself as well, like higher density, higher magic find, that kind of stuff. So it makes sense to test against those, but that doesn't mean they're still not performing very well in the lower tier maps. Magic Air, the main thing with these is that their AoE is a little bit limited. That's the only main thing that's making these a bit slower, and the fact that you're a Zon, so you're running around instead of like teleporting. So that's like the main thing slowing those down. Summons, so Summon Strafe, so this is Valkyrie Strafe. Valkyrie Decoy Strafe is what it is. So you put out decoys, Valkyrie, and then you strafe. It's definitely a bit of a slower approach than a lot of than standard strafe, but it's killing pretty fast though. It's not bad. It's definitely like A- clear speed, but it's very safe. As you can see here, I mean, even not just for Ubers, but just for mapping, it's just very safe to start out with too. And you don't need much for it to do to map at all. It's very good. And you can use something like Wild Witch String Bow, put down some decoys, put down some Valkyries, you're safe, you kill things. Yeah, super budget build. It's a super budget build. Got the 3 check marks there, meaning that you don't need much for it to map at all. It'll go into a map, it's good. You're even more safe because you have even more distractions for the monsters than normal. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good hardcore build. But yeah, anyway, let's continue to the Necromancer builds. People have been looking for the Necromancer builds. Thank you, Globalist and Logical Chaos again. Thank you, Ferguson. Yeah, I know. I think you were watching me when I only had like one viewer, man. So if I remember you correctly. Uh, what's up, man? It's always good to see that there's a lot of awesome passion for these. In my opinion, the best mod ever created for for Diablo 2, which is PD2, and just a lot of passion in the community in general. It's gonna be S8 tier list righteous. It is in the stream title. That is the command to access this. For anyone that wants to get in here, I know this. We've been having constantly almost 100 people in here. Just checking it out while we've been going over it, which is pretty cool. It's pretty standard stuff. The community isn't getting any smaller, I can tell you that much. If anything, it's getting a little bit bigger again. Have you tried Frozen Orb proc build by any chance? Frozen Orb proc isn't that great. The percent chance isn't very high on it, in my opinion. I much prefer the Frost Nova proc build on the Sorc, which is on the tier list. Some of those really memey things that are kind of trash in my opinion, I don't even bother putting them on the tier list. You can play them if you want. I mean, this isn't every build in the game, so it's at this point, it's damn near like 95% of them, but it's it's not every build. So you can always do something else. Always do something else. All right, Necromancer builds. Let's do it. All right, so here we go. We got some buffs to Poison Nova. They actually buffed the Synergies, so we got some number buffs. Also, Deathweb should be having a number buff as well, getting potentially an extra skill point. That's not bad. So I tested this, and it seems like it's got a couple thousand more damage again. It's more consistently one-shotting, which what put it to the S tier to begin with. Back in at one point it was like S plus, S double plus. This skill came down to like A plus after last season. It was looking pretty anemic for a very expensive build. As you can see, this build don't work on a budget. So for a build that doesn't work on a budget to only be A plus, that's kind of bad. So like it got buffed again this season, which is nice. It's definitely feeling a lot more effective. It's not one-shotting everything, but it's one-shotting like most things again. And it's starting to look a lot more consistent again. So this is one of those skills that very easily can become trash or insane. It's very touchy. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot more people play it this season. I don't consider it one of the very strongest approaches anymore, but it's definitely top 25. So Poison Nova is looking like a very strong mapper again. If you wanted to go that again, I definitely seeing some nice changes there from the testing. Desecrate. They did buff Desecrate directly as well. It didn't really change the calculus of how the build works. It's got limited AoE. But it's good at all points, and since you do it from a range, it's a lot easier to perform on a budget. The problem with Poison Nova is unless you have really good survivability and really good damage, you're not doing much. Desecrate has a lot more damage with a lot less, in terms of like how much damage you can actually do to the monsters. So, yeah, this thing ain't gonna do nothing if you have crappy gear, unless it's LOD content. But this is mapping, so just like to emphasize that, throughout, because some people ask me all the time. They're like, "But Dark Humility, it's so good in LOD content." It's like, I know it is. Go look at my starter lineup. Of course, some of those aren't even listed in the starter lineup because there's better stuff that's better to start out as. But it doesn't mean you can't start out. You can start out as almost anything if you really want. It's just there's recommended starters. All right, Poison Strike. I gotta say, retesting this with so it got buffed again this season, and then retesting it with tanky approach. So like making it tanky, focusing on that martyrdom, getting that block, getting that faster block rate, getting that chance on striking, obviously to cast the bone armor, getting the mercenary with Holy Freeze off of Doom and then freezes target off of Doom, that is the best way to play this build. Which is a little counterintuitive because a lot of people would be like, but I want to use a pus spitter to cast that lower res automatically. Now you'd want to do that on Poison Nova, right? And Poison Nova, it can work on Poison Nova. The problem with Poison Strike though, is if you do that when you jump into the monsters like that, and you kind of have to like spend a bit more time there, striking with your weapon, which the frames aren't like insane or anything. You're definitely gonna probably lose the mercenary, or you might lose a lot of stuff sometimes, or you don't have as much, so the monsters hit you more often because they're attacking too fast. I've found that if you really want this build to be solid at mapping, which it can be, and I have demos for it, like a lot of these seasons I demo it. I think I have a demo in season 8 for Poison Strike actually, just to show you guys the buffed one and how to make it tanky and how to make it feel good in a map. And so if you guys want to see that, it is on my YouTube. It's a solid build, man. It's a solid build. Surprisingly, this build, a lot of people think it's a meme, but it actually works. The biggest problem with it, though, is you need gear or it's garbage. And at least for mapping. And on hardcore, this is very sketchy, to say the least. I don't recommend that. All right. Teeth got nerfed. Uh-oh. Well, that's not a big surprise. Last season it was a solid S tier, and it was arguably a top 10 mapper. I think I have it on the last season's top 10 mapper designation. I think it's like number 10 or something. This build crushed it in maps last season. I used this build personally to get to 99 on hardcore last season. So this is the build I used last season to get to 99. Teeth is very, very strong. What they did though is they buffed Bone Spear and Bone Spirit, which is going to become very important when we come down here to the passive Boner build, which is a new build. But they buffed those, and then they nerfed Teeth. Teeth took a little bit of a hit from that for sure, but it's still going very fast. It's still very strong, and I think with enough skill points, it's still arguably just solid S tier. So Teeth is fine. Teeth is very budget. You can go full Trings and crush it. You can go hardcore is super safe because you can put golems out in front of you and get all your synergies. You got a lot of bone armor as well because you have to max bone armor to max out the damage dealing skills. So that means you can go all energy and have like 1800 bone armor and never take damage as long as you're paying attention to your bone armor. Yeah, it's really good. It's really solid build still. It's definitely still in that conversation for top 20 mappers. Absolutely. So definitely make that one. Corpse explosion. Oh man. Have you considered the ramifications for fortified maps and the increased damage to spear? It's okay. Are you saying like maybe you only use spear in a fortified map? Honestly, I don't think I tested that directly. I'll be totally honest with you. I would say that the damage buff on spear though suggests that it could be even better at fortified maps now. So it has good mobility, right? Because you have it's a Necromancer, so it's got blood warp, which is why a lot of these builds tend to be very strong. But I guess yeah, I could see Bone Spear being very good in fortified maps, but only certain maps though. The only problem I see though is that with the densities, sometimes the density is even too high for Bone Spear, and you don't always hit all the monsters directly. So even though it does a lot of damage, it's sometimes pretty hard to aim it and hard to get the damage where it needs to be, even in fortified maps. That's all I'm going to say about it. You can try it out though. I think this is both teeth and bone, right? Right here it says teeth, bone in parentheses. I think either way it's going to be about S minus no matter what you decide to do, but you're right. It does a ton of damage. Teeth is still a very dominant skill though. That's the problem. So I think now there's more of a you know what I might do here actually. I'm gonna put a check mark actually under fortify here. Yeah, I might let's see. This is T plus bone spear plus. I mean, it's the same build, right? So they're all synergies. Um, so I might actually designate that a little bit separately here. And so now it can do fortified because the bone spear is stronger. I think that's true because I think that big buff to the bone spear makes it worth it potentially. I didn't test it though. I actually am sad I didn't think to test that. Well, that's all right. We can do it next season maybe. It's just something more to get a bit more. But you know, I think it's safe to say that this is probably the case now where you could do it either way now. Um, and you can just use the correct skill. So that's kind of cool though. It's pretty good skill though. It's fun. Um, how's Fury Druid looking? Like you use all of these no matter what approach you use all of these skills all the time. Like even in a fortified map, there's some situations you still might want to use teeth. That's the thing. So you just use all the skills simultaneously. I don't know if I should split that build up at some point, but I don't think so. It's the same build. It's good though. It's good. Any special weapons for a corpse explosion? Okay, so yeah, let's talk about corpse explosion. Corpse explosion. This is another case just like the wind druid. Okay, guys, this is a case where um we had a build that was already strong last season. It was like S minus. It was strong already. You can already go through it and kill monsters pretty fast. They buffed Corpse Explosion directly. Like the skill got pretty big number changes, and it even got a radius compensation for losing out on martyrdom. And so it got its radius increase, which is a mechanics change. Remember, that's the biggest type. That's the best type of change. And so now you can even use Bone Flame, but you can also use like Ming Song's Lesson, and you don't lose any radius anymore because your radius is as good as it was if you had the old martyrdom. Yeah, it's not just cows, man. It's everything. I tried it in Canyon as well. This thing is crushing. So you don't even need curses anymore. It's dealing so much damage. All you gotta do is you teleport, lay down a desecrate, bam, bam, the whole screen falls down. Teleport, desecrate, bam, bam, whole screen's dead. You get strong enough items on this build, it's pretty crazy. And the crazy thing about it is that there's even budget approaches to this build because, like, really good ones, because you have revives that are strong too. Revives are maxed out because it's a synergy, and you can get really good revives in front of you. It's also why it's decent for hardcore. But then again, there's some main build options that aren't great for hardcore, so you might have to modify them. So like in Fortify, no, but when the monsters have like lower health, that shit just falls down instantly. Everything dies. So, like everything on the whole screen just gets wrecked, and it's super fast, super high mobility. With Blood Warp, you're just flying on this build. It's very strong, and it's not just cows. It's not just cows. Remember, I don't only test in cows. If a build sucks everywhere except for cows, it's getting a lower rating. Period. Um, because cow maps are a limited supply. You simply can't. Not everyone can run through those. So cows is good. You know, Blood Moon is good, but no, this build crushes at things that have nothing to do with Blood Moon. And I actually think this is currently the strongest mapping build in the game overall. Not by a lot, you know, it's about as strong as its S plus cousins, but once again, that's why they're all the same ranking, right? But I think it edges them out just a bit. Like it's just got good survivability, it's got bone armor, it's just I don't know. It's so fast, it's so strong. Yeah, you blow up the cows though. Cows, this thing will make the cow map done in like 5 minutes, like 4 or 5 minutes. Kind of like Ice Barrage doing sewers in 4 minutes, you know. It's pretty great stuff. Some of these S plus builds are pretty impressive. They're all about the same speed too, but they're all impressive, very impressive builds. Just super high mobility, one shots, just like crushing it, crushing it. This guy keep crushing it. Any special weapons like Ming Songs will work. Hodo Bone Flame will work. Mang's Song on Sockor is perfectly fine because you have bone armor and you just get lower resist for free too. And you just have like 50% fire damage. I don't know, there's some pretty nutty stuff you can use on that. Anyway, I have this build highlighted on my YouTube. So Corpse Explosion has a Season 8 demo. I try to make the fresh S plus builds. I made new demos for all of them except I think the Wind, because Wind was almost as strong as it was. It was almost S plus anyway, so I don't know. It just got a this thing went up 2/3 of a tier, so worth redemoing, I suppose. Anyway, Corpse Explosion very strong. Summon builds didn't change at all this season. This mostly reflects previous seasons, except for Fire Golems. Fire Golems got buffed, so you'll see a little bit of a buff here. I think I buffed them up 1/3 of a tier. It wasn't a big buff though. It was pretty small, honestly. They nerfed the early game and then they buffed the late game to compensate, with it overall being a tiny bit stronger in the late game, but it's almost unnoticeable. I think ever since they lowered the AoE on these and only allowed you to summon 6 of them, it's never going to be insanely strong. But like in a map like Tomb of Zoltan Kulle, solid A, absolutely. It's crushing the monsters, it's killing them pretty darn fast. No problem. Can use Dominion, can use Ming Song, there's stuff you can use on that one. One thing to note is that some of these summon builds got a downward adjustment despite not being changed because they were retested. And summon builds just in general compared to the rest of the pack of builds that are moving up in strength in the game are becoming weaker comparatively. So that's something to kind of note. Now, they're still good speed, but summon builds are for lazy people. This is why, anything with a lot of summons or, that has a lot of mixed damage, like these builds here, is going to be really good on a budget, and it's just really safe. And you can do it even, you can start farming those tier 1 maps practically day 1 if you want. It's going to be slow. I don't recommend it. I always recommend going into doing LOD farming for a few days before going into any kind of mapping, because like mapping monsters are just tougher. So even if there's really high density, it's just you're not going to get as much benefit than just crushing an LOD area typically. But that is to say though that they're that budget, you can just shoestring budget, just slap them together with some basic items, and once you get like full trains or something, it's gonna crush. Absolutely. I also retested Mage Skellies, Elemental Summons. I retested the physical damage builds. Yeah, it's still strong. It's just a little slow. That's all. Just a little bit. It's not as fast as it used to be. Also, they nerfed one of the revive types, I think, last season or something. I don't know. It's still strong, though. All right, Dart Pact, make the staves do work for you. The chance to cast on casting. That's chance to cast the curses on casting is what really does the damage on Dart Pact. Of course, you can get lower resist or amp off of Wrath. I think Wrath is the best approach on the Merc. It's 60% chance, and then you also use Weaken on Obsession. So this is like the best use of the Obsession staff rune word is on Dark Pact, and then you're getting like 2 curses like almost instantly most of the time. You slap on a 3rd curse, everything dies in 1 shot. It can be sometimes a tiny clunky, but not really. Like it just 1 shots almost everything. It's very fast. So I don't really think it's like, I think it's top 15, but I don't know if it's top 10 anymore because they nerfed it last season. Ever since they did that, it's feeling a little weaker, but it's still strong. It's still very strong. And I have a demo for this from last season. So if you want to know how to play the new Dark Pact with the new items and the new meta for Dark Pact, check out the Season 7 demo. That one will be good. Mosh Pit hasn't changed. This is a meme build that uses some of these meme curses to a combination of them to make the monsters kill each other. So It's slow, but they die eventually. It's trash, but yeah, there you go. Good stuff. Could be pretty good for hardcore though, because the monsters are always confused. So that's a bonus. All right, so let's go into we're starting to run out of builds to go over in the late game mapping tier list, which is great. And then we have about an hour to kind of go over some of these other lists here. And of course, remember you guys can check out all of these things for yourselves, which is pretty beast. And you guys can check them out. How is Fury Druid looking? Yeah, so Fury Druid with Bariza or Windhammer is crushing maps, man. Even like Fortified, and it doesn't matter, nerfs or not. Like I retested it after the nerfs. It's perfectly fine, man. You'll see this on the tier list. Remember, if you want to access this yourself, if you want to know how to interpret the tier list, I talk about everything that's pretty relevant in this video. So we're making a video for YouTube. You're watching it live. This is live right now. I post it on YouTube later. It'll be posted on YouTube tomorrow. So check it out tomorrow. There'll be a Q&A after we're finished this as well. Going over these other infographics will be a lot faster. I'm just going a bit into detail on some of these builds is what I'm going on here. I think people like to hear about the builds, how my interpretation of how they're functioning. All right, this is one of the best proc builds using the Innocence Blade Shield. In the game, it's passive boner. That's right. So Brand has level 45 Bone Spear, I think it is. It's pretty high. It has a very high proc chance for it. So what happens is you max out the synergies for Bone Spear, and then you just basically get 2,000 bone armor. And then you don't need a shield. Just wear the bow, 2,000 bone armor. You jump into stuff with Blood Warp. Bone Spears start going everywhere, all over the screen, and everything dies. That's basically how it's played. It's obviously not super consistent, and this might be one of the harder builds to get the attack rating you need for the Blade Shield check for procking, but it's really strong. And so you use Brand and Innocence. Brand is a bow. Brand is very, very strong. It's also used, you can also strafe with it. It's kind of cool looking. I actually think this is stronger to use it on a Necromancer because you have the synergies, though. And that's really the key for a lot of these meme builds is you need the synergies on the class. It's the same thing for the Zeal Druid. You need the synergies for Firestorm and Molten Boulder. It's the same thing every time. Zeal Necro, same thing. Breath of the Dying is Poison Nova. So you need the Poison Nova synergies to make it work. This is why these are actual builds and are not just like fucking around. These things do damage. They clear maps. That's the thing. They're clearing at the same speed. This is clearing at the same speed as fire golems. That's how fast it is. I'd say maybe even a tiny bit faster. I mean, there's always very tiny differences within the same tier, right? I'd say it's a little faster though. You go into Pandemonium Citadel with the magic build. This is magic damage, and it's killing the monsters very fast. This isn't just cows. Once again. You can do this in Pandemonium. You just jump into as many monsters as possible, constantly surrounding yourself with monsters. You have 2,000 bone armor, so you don't have to constantly refresh the bone armor. You do have to watch it though, otherwise, with Brand, you're just dead if you run out of your bone armor. Your character is dead. If you ever run out of bone armor on this build, your character is dead. This is why there is an X on the hardcore here. It's not good. It's not good. That is pretty much what happens. So you're using a bow, so like go figure, right? You're jumping into the monsters with a bow. It's even worse than say like a paladin where it's still an X on hardcore for the bow builds, where you don't have a shield option or anything. It's even worse. You're jumping into the monsters with a bow. The only thing that's better than the paladin is that you got crazy bone armor, but once that runs out, you're dead. So be careful on that one. That'll be fun stuff, but besides that, it's actually got good survivability as long as you don't run out of bone armor. I just think it's too dangerous to be on hardcore. It's not consistent enough. You're gonna have an accident at least once. It's gonna be it for you. Obviously, it requires very expensive rune words, no budget, and it's using a proc, so probably no fortify. You're not gonna be able to punch through those very tanky monsters that easily. Then again, I don't know. Maybe you can. Also, there's not enough density. So proc builds typically need density. You'll see this as a pretty common theme here, that these builds don't do fortify. Um, they just don't. This one can because it's got like decent zeal damage, but almost all the other ones do not. Same thing with this one. This one has like some decent zeal damage, but most of these other builds do not. So actually, I don't even think this one's zeal damage is justifiable, honestly. It's pretty bad. I'm gonna put that one as an X2. I don't know why that one's like there. I didn't look over that carefully enough. This one's fine though. Breath of the Dying, you can make that thing hit. I think maybe though, just because it's Poison Nova and because they're mostly being boosted now by the Innocence proc, I'd say that now you probably, because of Innocence, I'm gonna take off this old Fortified designation. This is from last season. I kind of just didn't look at it carefully enough. I don't really think you should do Fortify with any of the proc builds, but because you really just want as much density as possible. You just want to jump in and kill things. It's not really about the other stuff anymore. But yeah, anyway. Now Zeal Necro you can make absurdly tanky, alright? So passive boner, that's what I'm calling it, because you're literally just jumping into monsters with brand and bone armor. That's all you gotta do, and everything dies. It's pretty great. But Zeal Necro, you can use Zeal because you actually have a pretty strong Breath of the Dying. You do have a decent high damage weapon. It's about 7k Zeal actually, so that's nice. On top of the fact that that's helping you proc. So Zeal is probably like the only skill besides passively procking these things is actually good on. A lot of people have asked about using the skill itself on top of it. There's no point, because it kills things too fast. And if you're killing things with the actual skill, you may as well just kill things with the actual skill, because then you lose your density too fast as well. So there's just no point. What you really just want to do is you want to either do some kind of passive proc or you want to do Zeal. Zeal works because Zeal also adds to the procs quite a bit, and it also helps sustain in a lot of cases as well. So Poison Nova works with Zeal because you got Breath of the Dying, which has Poison Nova 40, level 40. And Innocence is proccing that as well with the Bone Shield. It's pretty solid. The problem with Poison Nova, though, versus some of these other procs, which is why this proc approach is a bit weaker than others, is that the damage doesn't stack when your Poison Nova hits on over and over. It just resets. So that's a bit of a limitation there for damage, and it makes it go slower for sure. And that's where you got it. However, this is amazing for hardcore if you build this right, and I'll tell you why. It's because you got the sustain from Zeal, but Martyrdom, which is what you want to use for this, you will get infinite procs practically of bone armor. This thing will never run out of bone armor if played properly. You will have infinite tankiness as long as you have res and infinite bone armor on this thing. You shouldn't die playing this build. I think I even have a... I think I might have screwed up when I was demoing it, but I think in general you shouldn't do that. I did this. I have a video for both of these builds, by the way, on my YouTube for Season 8, if you want to see these proc builds. I have most of the proc builds I have a video for because they're all pretty interesting. I also have videos for just other builds that got changed significantly this season. But yeah, like Corpse Explosion, things like that. But yeah, that's pretty good. Anyway, that's the Necromancer. Necromancer looking pretty good. Paladin. What's the base for the Zeal Necro? Like I said, check out the video on my YouTube. I have videos for this. It's F Breath of the Dying Zerker. You do want the Zerker, actually. You get your attack speed no matter what. So you do want to get the Zerker on that one. You're supposed to use Fanaticism on the Merc, so... Yeah, because you jump into the monsters. You'll see how to build it. It's a little complicated, but obviously you're not doing these on a budget anyway. So if you ever want to have fun and you have too many funds to mess around with, these are quite fun builds for sure, though. Thank you so much, by the way, Gymnasium, for launching a Xana attack on the stream. I kind of missed that a little bit. I was focusing on the video, but yeah. What's up, Gymnasium, man? Gymnasium supports the entirety of the Diablo community as well, just like me. He's be doing PD2, be doing D2R and D4, so despite, I know there's not a love for D4 in the D2 community, but you know, we all you know, we try to keep an open mind and see what works and what doesn't. You know, obviously that game is still in its infancy, so some things don't work very well, particularly late game loot farming, but you know, that's all right. Maybe it'll get better. We'll see. All right, anyway, Fist of the Heavens, Holy Bolt, Unchanged skill. It's more of a grouping ability than anything for that max conviction, and it's also really good for starting out. As a late game mapper, it's kind of comparatively a little slow, but you know, it's still almost strong and balanced. Is barely there, you know, pretty decent still. But you want to know something that's actually really funny? So this is actually a case where the proc build on the Paladin. So the Paladin was, remember how I said in the beginning here that the Paladin's one of the classes that received some of the most changes that are influential on actually impacting a lot of builds this season. There's a lot of them. And obviously, like Innocence and Asylum being used as in a two-handed sword, and having the skill Holy Sword is actually making a proc build better than the actual skill. I know that's kind of crazy, but it's true. When it comes to foe, like the problem with foe mostly is the limitation on how fast you can cast it, which you know is a little slow, right? Because you know it's very powerful. But what if you could just jump into monsters and cast it more often? Well, then it performs better. There you go. That's what foe proc is. You use Asylum and Innocence. You jump in with Holy Sword. You don't die because you have block. Holy Sword grants block. It's a new skill this season, which means all the two-handed builds on the Paladin are infinitely better this season. And they balanced it by the end of the closed beta. It's looking very strong. So all of that is looking very, very good in general. So yeah, it's good. You could just jump in a monster with Joust. You can jump mostly Joust, Joust and charge right through the monsters and just proc all the foes you can. Fist of the Heavens. Remember, Fist of the Heavens synergies are on the Paladin, so that's why we do that once again. It's one of the best proc builds I have tested. It's very strong. It's obviously not as strong as an S tier build because it's, you know, it's a proc build. But for a meme build that's like purely a meme build, that shit is strong. Very, very strong indeed. Thank you again, Gymnasium, by the way. Thank you again. Sorry I missed you immediately there. Excellent. It was such a blast to play. Oh, yeah, those are good stuff. We're going to have question and answer a bit as well. Physical Zeal. Physical Zeal one-handed is unchanged. Still crushes Fortified Maps. Still very good in hardcore. Blessed Hammer, unchanged. Was retested, though, but it doesn't matter. Still crushes hardcore. Easy, really easy to make it tanky. To be fair, as long as the Paladin build can use a Holy Shield, it is good for hardcore no matter what. If it can't use Holy Shield and only Holy Sword, it depends on the skill. Some of the skills are too clunky. And then obviously if the skill uses a bow, or requires taking damage, maybe not great for hardcore either. Fist of the Heavens is great on a budget, but as you can see in the late game, it struggles. Really easy to get decent gear for this, though, like full Griswold set, you know, things like that, which aren't that hard to get. It makes it very strong. But you'll see, like, Blessed Hammer is still crushing. Blessed Hammer's main limitation is just the fact that the hammers move in this weird circular pattern. So, besides that, it, like, one-shots, two-shots most monsters. You can do Fortified as well because it does so much damage. So it's mostly the fact that it can't move through a map very fast, but it crushes monsters like instantaneously almost. It looks really good in cows actually, but yeah, I mean it's got some limitations there. One of the top 25 strongest builds though is Blessed Hammer late game, absolutely though. You're gonna see Physical Zeal doing great across the board. There are budget options for weapons that make it decent. And there also are budget options for Physical Zeal with two-handed Holy Sword now, especially things like Cloud Crack for extra undead damage, using the undead bonus off of Holy Sword as well, which also grants that in addition to block and a couple other things. But see, two-handed Holy Sword is actually better than one-handed Holy Sword for mapping now. For the first time ever, this has actually happened. So unlike before where you would just die too easily and you really couldn't test it because you had no block and you would just instantly get absolutely just rectified, you know, every time you try to like charge and then joust into monsters with a two-handed sword or whatever, two-handed anything, you get crushed. Now though, with a holy sword, physical zeal is absolutely destroying fortified maps. Like I think only Dragon Tail and Fury Druid is faster, and that's mostly because of mobility, um, mobility issues. But I mean, obviously with charge, it's pretty solid. Charge, joust, you're doing like 38k zeal now, and this stuff you got tank. You're tanky enough. You sustain enough. You got amp and stuff. Physical zeal, I got a video on YouTube. So not only just for faux proc, I have a video for that as well. I have a season 8 video also for physical zeal two-handed holy sword. Definitely check that out. I think you guys might like what you see. It crushes fortified maps. It's even stronger than regular zeal, and it's doing it very fast. Those monsters are getting one shot. Like it's fortified monsters is getting downed. Getting down by that skill. It's too strong. It's got it not too strong, but it's awesome though. It's awesome. Obviously, Zeal suffers though from density problems. So whenever there's too many monsters, it starts to slow down. But that's that's why you do fortified. Just make sure to do that, and you can make this tanky enough for hardcore now. You just gotta adjust some of the build. Two-handed sword can do that. Physical charge. This skill's too clunky for hardcore, and you need so much damage that you can't really do it on a budget. But it's possible, and it's gained some ranks this season because of Holy Sword. It's still clunky, though. Now, keep in mind, this is physical charge, not elemental charge. There's a big difference. Physical charge will never do as much damage as the elemental charges, most likely. It used to be C tier last season, though, so it's coming up just because of this skill. You used to be able to just charge into things and you kill them, but if monsters got you first, you would die. Now that doesn't happen nearly as much, so, but still clunky. Vengeance unchanged. It's pretty decent capabilities across the board. It's just a very average skill, but it's too clunky to reach the S tier. You know, it doesn't have the immediate crushing damage all the time. But you know, it's been retested. It keeps getting a little bit better. Maybe eventually it will. Smite. Acrorats. So here's the thing about Smite. Smite got major damage buffs this season. It also got knockback removed, which is like the biggest problem with this skill. And now, because of Innocence, you can proc the hammer using Smite insanely reliably. And so you can actually use that or Zeal to proc the Acrorats hammers. I like Smite because then you can move faster and don't get stuck in the animation. But you could do either one. And it's a pretty decent proc approach. Without the proc, Smite is still pretty trash in maps, but I'd say it's at least C tier even without the procs. I'd say it's at least C tier, honestly. I could maybe like distinguish these two here. I didn't do that before, but you know, it makes sense to maybe do that here. Maybe I go Smite standard. This is just like going off only the Smite damage. I'd say it's out of the D tier now, though. I'd say it's a pretty solid C tier, maybe C+. It's killing things a lot more consistently because you don't got the knockback and it's got a lot more damage. And it would still kill fortified maps for sure. The Acrorats approach can do fortify or non-fortify, so that's pretty good. Neither one could do hardcore. You need pretty good gear, though. I mean, I guess Smite, maybe not so much. But it's not going to clear a map without tons of damage. So, like, Astarians and all that fun stuff. So, there you have it. So, yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's not bad one way or the other, though. I'd say there's a type of Smite now that actually, you know, is able to go into the green zone now, so that's pretty cool. Anyway, sacrifice though. Sacrifice one-handed. I still think one-handed sacrifice is better. People really wanted in my stream two-handed sacrifice to be good with the Holy Sword. No. The frames are just too awful on the two-handed sword for it. You really need a faster thing like a one-handed weapon. And Schaefer's is just too good with the fact that it lowers the monster HP immediately, making them a lot more vulnerable to the corpse explosion that follows. Maybe if the corpse explosion did even more damage, you wouldn't need that, and it would be fine with two-handed. But two-handed is just way too clunky. I mean, it's okay. You're clearing the map, kind of, sort of. But I'd much prefer to use a very powerful one-handed, faster, cleaner weapon that, you know, you're not worried about just taking damage while you try to get the damage in on the... You would think the stronger weapon would be better, but no, not really. Not really. It's a lot easier to get it in with Schaefer still. So Sacrifice is still better without the two-handed approach, oddly enough. Schaefer's Hammer is still number one. Offensive tree. I tried testing this in all kinds of different ways, by the way. So I think I was thorough enough. We have demos from previous, from like season 7 for Sacrifice, by the way, if you want to see how to build that still. Okay, so what do we got here? Oh yeah, all right, elemental stuff. All right, so elemental charges looking really good. They're just looking really strong in general. And yeah, like they're still as strong as they were last season. Like elemental charge, ever since they fixed charge and everything and made it work even at minimum range and not having to like swipe, it's just really strong now. And Flame Bellow Dragon, because of Holy Sword, you can use Flame Bellow now, which is even higher Holy Fire than Dragon and Hand of Justice. So it's doing even more damage. So arguably, yeah, it still earns its spot, even with other builds getting stronger in comparison or being readjusted to where they should be. Holy Fire is still earning that spot in the top 10. It's really fast mapper. It's really clean. I do have a demo for this for season 8 on my YouTube for Flame Bellow Dragon Holy Fire Charge. Definitely check that out. It's pretty clean stuff. Not dying either, can make it good enough for hardcore. Of course, most Paladin builds are either like great or, you know, can be modified. Holy Freeze obviously being better for hardcore, making sense because it's Holy Freeze. Blessed Hammer because it's easier to make the Merc more tankier. You know how it is sometimes with some of these builds. You know, Physical Zeal with one hand is just like insanely tanky. Can have all the damage and defensive auras you want. You can even use like Exile if you wanted to. I don't know. Pretty for decrep, a lot of fun stuff you can do there. There's a lot of different approaches. They also buffed Holy Shock a little bit directly, and they buffed Holy Fire directly. So you're seeing some of these builds come up a third of a tier. In general, you really can't go wrong, though. I'd say Holy Shock Charge with Dual Dreams is probably the worst of all of these approaches. Yeah, Doom Shattered Wall, doesn't matter what you do, it's just really strong. The map that you might want to specialize in will change based on immunities, of course, you know, as I always talk about, but yeah, that's pretty much it. Good stuff. So Hustle also made the Holy Shock multiple shot, so using Widowmaker. Paladin build even better because now you can get more negative res on it, so it's clearing monsters very effectively in tier 3s now. But it's still limited by its survivability and limited, of course, by its movement. You can joust with a bow, by the way, which is something pretty cool. So it's not too bad mobility-wise. It's actually crushing pretty good. I'd say if you're going to use some weird bow build, a bow paladin is definitely very solid, and that's the best version. The Sanctuary Aura version is more budget, though, because you don't need all the negative res or anything. You just need Sanctuary Aura and Widowmaker and some plus skills. So you can make that work as well. And then, of course, some of these other approaches are just more budget because they're using magic damage. Magic damage is always easy to get budget. That's why they're usually the top starting builds in LOD, the starter builds in general. Thorns is still kind of the same. You can proc bleed and stuff using Thorns now with Innocence if you really want, but it's still trash. It's still really trolly. You can do it if you want though. Thorns is a never. I mean, it's not as big of a meme as it used to be. I mean, it used to be like F tier, don't touch. You know, you can actually do some damage with it. But that's pretty much it, man. That's pretty much it for all the builds. Zeal is good. You want to do Zeal typically for Uber bosses and things like that. You want to use Charge for the vast majority of content. You'll see that there's Zeal down here. And there's like Zeal down here in the Uber boss areas. So anyway, let's quickly go over the... got a bunch of graphics to go over in about 45 minutes here. Let's see if we can get it done. Solo mapping top 10. So I literally just copy paste these from the solo mapping tier list. That's all this is. These are all the S plus builds. It's really hard to differentiate builds within a tier. But typically things like survivability will make them go even higher. Maybe a small, tiny little itty bitty edge in clear speed, like with Corpse Explosion, will make them go up there. You know, things like, you know, just very consistent damage will make them go a little bit higher. These I would consider to be the meta best builds, but anything that's like S minus or above definitely can excel at solo mapping. Anything below that will be probably solid as well. Once you go below A tier, that's where it starts to maybe struggle, and you maybe don't want to do that solo anymore. But these builds are very fast. All these builds will absolutely crush maps. Frozen Orb is almost an S plus build in my opinion. It's the top of the S builds. It's even faster than the nerfed Nova as it stands now, especially with retesting. I have learned that this build is just really strong. Frozen Orb and Plague Javelin, I would say, were kind of mistested last season a little bit, so that's why they are rated higher. And those are the only builds I probably mistested. But, like, you know, I learned some things when I test the builds sometimes. It's pretty good. Always get better at testing the builds, get better at understanding how the build operates. Wake of Fire is still up there. I would say it's the lowest of these S tier approaches though, because you do have to kind of like, you know, lay down a trap and shit, but it still like clears the whole screen, so I don't know. Holy Fire Charge just feels amazing. Wind Druid is moving up in the world in this tier list. Some builds are moving lower comparatively due to nerfs. Some builds are just moving lower comparatively, like Holy Fire, even though it got stronger this season. Other builds, because they got like more consistent mobility, are getting higher up due to their buffs. Wind, Ice Barrage, Blade Dance, all buffed this season. Rabies, I just underrated. You know, I tried to test those nerfs last season, and so I put it down to compensate at the end when they nerfed it again, and they nerfed it in a way I couldn't test. When I was able to test it again in Season 8, I saw that those nerfs did nothing, and even further nerfs did nothing. So I'm putting Rabies back where it belongs, at the top. Because Rabies is just super, super fast. The only thing smoother than Rabies, though, are things like Corpse Explosion and Whirlwind with 2 Flame Billows. That's it. Yeah, this is, you know, once again, this is a little hard to make. You know, I realize some people might have some opinions as to maybe what could go up there. Maybe some people would say some of these are even still S+, depending on how you run them. But I think this is a pretty good list. If you ran any of these top 10 builds with their max gear, solo mapping, and you weren't crushing that map, you can complain to me. You gotta be crushing those maps. You bring out the stopwatch for these builds, man. Like, that's how these builds work. That's how strong they are. They are going to burn rubber. How is Corpse Explosion for single target decent? It won't be like insanely fast, but with the help of like strong revives, it will be very fast. Corpse Explosion has 0 mapping weaknesses whatsoever. Don't worry about weaknesses. It's not like Dark Pact where it clearly sucks against bosses. No, like Corpse Explosion is strong against everything, and it's absurdly strong against density. So yeah, it's Yeah, you don't want to necessarily, you want density with corpse explosions, you don't want to fortify, but that's about it. Season 7 to season 8 biggest movers. I'm gonna make Steel Carapace work. Do it! Do it, man! Do it! Steel Carapace proc, do it, man. I mean, you can't use Innocence over it, though, because it's an armor, but do it. Alright, here we go, man. We got Smite. I'm just gonna say Smite generically. Like, there is a type of a Smite now that is actually effective. So Smite in general is seeing massive boosts to its scores. That's good. They're not like crazy mapping builds still though. They're not. They're still you can use them though. You can use them for the Uber bossing now though. They have even more of a place I think in the Uber bossing scheme of things. We have Zeal Druid coming up a lot due to the presence of Innocence. Innocence is making those procs a lot more reliable on the Zeal Druid. Deep Wounds coming up a lot this season from last season just due to getting its cap lifted. Ice Barrage, that nerf looks small, but it's a mechanics change and it's huge. Corpse Explosion got significant numbers and a mechanics change. It's looking very strong. Probably the strongest mapping build in the game, if not in the top 3, depending on how you judge it. Physical Charge. Definitely better due to two-handed, absolutely. Holy Shock multi-shot. Yep, that's looking better due to the runeword Hustle. Fist of Fire. Those numbers changes helped it quite a bit. I think it needed a bit more damage to one-shot things. Wind. Well, that didn't need a buff, but now that it has one, it's in the top. Poison Nova also looking strong again. Overall class power ranking. Got 7 builds here. Boom-a-da-boom-da-boom. All right, so I'll talk about, so this is pretty similar to last season. I don't think there's been a lot of changes. I think Sorceresses came up a bit, though, mostly due to the energy shield buff, making them a bit tankier. They're already one of the strongest early game classes, just like Druid. And of course, they got a build now that's like one of the they got like multiple mapping builds in the top 10. So I kind of can't ignore them. I think they gotta be there with the mobility and everything as well. Druid still has mastery and dominion over every endgame activity and even starting out due to Summon Druid just being so reliable and other builds being so reliable. I think Druid's still the strongest class in the game. Assassin has a ton of really strong mapping builds, as you can see, but it's also tanky enough for Uber bosses. It does everything very well. It has a lot of strong starting scenarios as well. Can't really go wrong. Necromancer only really has one weakness, is that Uber Rathma and Uber Clone, or just they're kind of rough for this class, honestly. And that's because it just doesn't have a lot of health, and it's really hard to survive the fight. Besides that, though, mapping builds, it's got the strongest mapping build in the game. So, well, I got to kind of put it somewhere like up there in the list. Also, some of the other mapping builds are staying the same or they're going up. It's got a lot of very strong mapping builds. It's got a lot of strong starting scenarios. It really only just kind of suffers when it comes to Declone and Rathma. It's the hardest class to execute those bosses on. Which is it's not impossible, of course, it's just hard. Barbarian is looking pretty good across the board. It used to be like rank 3, but after that find item nerf, which by the way has still not been reversed, its starting capability has looked a lot more grim compared to other classes, so it's not as good of a starter. It's not one of the best Rathma or decloners either, but it's solid. And it has a lot of strong mappers, so it can't be last place for sure. It's still a strong class. Class overall looking very good. Paladin, still not last place. It was last place for like 3 seasons in a row. Last season it came up to 5. I'd say it's back down to 6 now, even with all the buffs that it received. Because like it's still, I don't know, there's a good argument for maybe Paladin being anywhere in these 4 here maybe at this point, but it's not last, I'll tell you that much. I think it's stronger against Ubers this season, and I'll tell you why when I get to the Ubers over here. I'll tell you why it is. But yeah, for sure. Definitely stronger against the Ubers. And of course, we got the and of course it's got stronger mapping builds too. It's really hard to kind of judge how strong the classes are overall because they're getting really close together and they get more closer. They get closer every season. Amazon's really only down here because her starting approaches are okay. She has a very good starter like Uber build. Her endgame mapping capability is the weakest of all of the classes, and she has okay Uber capabilities as well. I feel like Amazon is a pretty solid last at the moment, but it's not super far last, and it's got a lot of strong approaches. So even the last place build is still looking very strong, or last place class, I should say, still looking very strong. It's just I think that I think this for sure needs to go last at the moment right now. I think that for sure is where it should be. These three are probably where they should be. There's an argument for whether or not you could mix around Necromancer, Paladin, or Barbarian. Paladin, you could easily be said to be like 4. You could even swap it with Necromancer if you wanted to. Necromancer's just got such a strong mapping presence, though, so I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. Like, Paladin's got stronger Uber presence, too, now, though. Barbarian's kind of a jack of all trades, but he's not, like, the strongest at anything, so I don't know. Pretty good, though. I'd say this is where I currently fall right now, but, like, if Paladin's number 6, you can see just how strong all the classes are, so it's solid. Yeah, that's the thing. It's fun to think about De La Puff, but honestly, this isn't very important. This is still the same as season 7, so I'm not really gonna go over it. And even season 6, I think these are just the strong builds that if you have one of these on your team and you're doing a dungeon or a tier 3 map, your team is typically gonna be a lot stronger. And if you have multiple of these on your team is gonna function like a well-ordered machine, like a well-oiled machine. These are the types of builds you want on a team in a group approach. They're very good builds. Obviously, you know, Conviction Aura is very important. And things like Summon Necro are just insanely strong, and you can have curses with them. People don't typically make Curse Necros, but man, they're so amazing if you have one. You know, things like that. So this hasn't been modified. It's okay. Solo dungeon builds. These builds can solo a dungeon by dying through them or by playing very carefully because they have multiple elements. So they can overcome the fact that there's unbreakable immunities and there's a ton of immunities and there's every immunity in the dungeons by having multiple elements of damage. And that's about it. Pretty interesting, you know, pretty basic stuff here. I don't think anyone's surprised by any of these builds being in here because they're all capable of soloing a dungeon. If you ever want to do that, fun stuff. Tier 4s, fun guys can do it. New in Season 8. Most builds cannot solo a dungeon. They will just not be able to do it. They'll die. There'll be too many monsters. You won't be able to actually clear a lot of the monsters, or you get overwhelmed by one particular monster. It just doesn't die. New in Season 8. So what we have here is the new builds. Fury Twister proc. Proc Smite Paladin. New build. There you go. They're all here. They're all strong. They're all crushing it. And they're all big. So there you go. Good stuff in general. Very, very good stuff. I like all these. I like it. It's very good. A lot of these builds just came up due to the presence of the new Innocence rune word. This one due to Flame Bellow getting some attack speed. Obviously, Holy Sword made this build possible. There's technically other builds as well I could have put on here, like 2H Sanctuary, Sacrifice. But I didn't really think they were notable enough to put here because they kind of suck. So I put the good one. And yeah, there you go. These are Blade Sentinel is actually a thing now. It has AoE and you can use it to just map with only Blade Sentinel, and it's actually its own mapping approach. So that's really cool. Some mechanical changes making that possible. and other cool stuff. So you can see down here what has been added to the tier list. Barbarian was added just because I never tested it. Some cases, some things just get added because they fell through the cracks. All right. Okay, so I can go into huge detail on these, but what these are here over on the right side, actually before we go into these, let's go to the far right side just to remind people. If you ever want to know what maps you want to do on a build depending on your element, make sure to avoid immunities. These are the immunities for every map, and it also has all the maps listed in each tier, including the 3 unique maps which don't have immunities. Of course, you can even see the exact numbers. I don't know if I'll keep that up at some point, but for now it does, and they're accurate, so that's cool. And you can use this as a guideline. Also, my filter, in addition to I think Chrisard's filter, also has I think that's how you say it, Chrisard's or Cry Lizard's filter, whatever you want to say. His filter also does that as well. Also let you know what the immunities are on the map. My filter does as well. So exclamation filter in my channel, I'll let you know what your immunities are in the map. So if you run it, you know what to avoid. All right, so I'm gonna kind of do like a short overview of this, but this is my starter lineup. So these are like the best starter builds I think for each class. You can start with practically anything. It's just that these builds have the best, farm ability. They're the best able to farm the bosses, Travancore, Chaos, Mephisto, Arcane Sanctuary, cows, normal cows. They're able to farm these areas the best. And these are the areas that are going to get you the wealth that you need to map typically. Effectively, obviously, you can do it anyway with like a summon build or maybe Corpse Explosion or something. But these are the builds that are going to get you there. These are the builds that are going to get you there pretty fast. Some of those 85 areas like Stony Tomb, Pit, I can mention some other ones as well. Maybe Maggot Lair in the case of some of the fire builds. But I think you guys get the idea. These builds perform well in the beginning of the game in those areas that do well. Corrupted zones are a thing now, which means if you ever need World Stone Shards, you can go to whatever zone is corrupted and kill the monsters in it. However, there's a lot of zones, which are typically not the 85 ones, that are just terrible because they have no density, and unless they make some kind of further change to them, you probably just want to completely ignore them. So for the most part, you're still farming for your gear like in the normal areas. Those corrupted zones might be good for World Stone Shards, but it doesn't really shake it up too much in terms of like what you would want to start with. I want to start with that so that people understand that's how it is. So like if I put number 1 here, so this is in order. In my opinion, Ice Barrage is the best sort now, especially after that change. You see that the top builds are all cold builds. And then you have Fire and Lightning. Lightning would be for Arcane Sanctuary. Like Fire would be for Stony Tomb, maybe. Or Maggot Lair. And then these, these are really good for Travancore and Mephisto and Andy, which are going to get you rich really fast. And then maybe also Chaos Sanctuary as well. So you get the idea that some of those top farming areas, typically like the builds that perform the best in those, are going to be ranked above the ones that perform in maybe lesser farmer areas, or ones that are a little bit less consistent, or ones where it might take a bit more damage to get going. So like some of these builds just do really well with less damage, which is why they're ranked higher. It's the same thing for Uber Tristram, D-Clone killers, and Rathma killers, which are all separated on my tier list in Season 7. I try to rank the ones on top that are the best approaches, but to be fair, there's good arguments sometimes for builds being ordered or ranked differently depending on the boss or depending on your opinion of these things. So like for D-Clone and Rathma, I don't know how seriously to take the ranking. For, Uber Tristram, it's a bit more straightforward. However, some of this stuff, is just to show you the builds that are good for this task. Obviously, like, I still rank Fury on top. That's pretty obvious stuff. But some of this stuff, like maybe you can argue Cobra Strike is even number 1. Yeah, that's possible. Some of these top 10s are a little bit more flexible as well. This isn't as hard of a science. This is more research over here. and test research and testing and changes due to patch notes. Whereas this is hard testing. So late game mapping tier list gets tested hard. This stuff is pretty precise. This stuff not as precise. Just keep that in mind when looking over my tier list here. Even the starters is a little bit less precise, but starters are pretty easy to determine because it's almost always the same stuff. Like there's some changes this season, like Holy Fire Charge. I think this has maybe been underrated anyway, but with a two-hander now on a Paladin, like you could just crush LOD content with it, right? It makes more sense to start out with a build like that than it used to. So it's on the list instead of maybe something that wasn't quite as consistent. This season, you also have like I put Claws of Thunder on here because you have a bit more of consistent early game with the Dragon Claw expending multiple charges. That's good for Arcane Sanctuary. Obviously, like the top builds are like Wake of Fire and the Secret Cow level, or like in Stony Tomb. But you can see the differences though. Phoenix Strike's got multiple elements, so it's got good survivability. Excuse me, so you can farm almost anywhere with that. And then, yeah, I mean, rabies can farm in cows. You know, fire on a druid can farm in cows or maggot lair. You know, you get the idea. You know, there's a lot of good stuff here. Wind can farm chaos with ease. Summon can also farm chaos with ease, but it takes less to do it because you can farm anything on a summon druid with no gear as long as it's LOD content. And in maps, you just need like 5 skills or something, and it's strong. So, you know, we still got some of the top approaches. Support approaches are kind of listed a little bit here if they're like a really good support build for starting out. Warcry is just super consistent trap farmer, but ever since, of course, it lost the find item percentage by a huge amount. It's not looking as good in trap as it used to, but you know, obviously Barb is still up there. It's still in the top 10 conversation, even with that huge nerf. Used to be like number 1 starting approach almost, or like number 2, but you know. You got the Sork builds on the up and up though. I mean, they always Sork has just got tons of mobility, so it's always going to be solid. Boss farming is just really good for farming starting gear. You know, you got Summon Druid still crushing it with almost nothing. Teeth is still insanely strong for starting out. You can crush Pit, can crush Chaos, you can even crush Travancore. It doesn't matter what it does. Magic damage is usually very good for those areas. Corpse Explosion doesn't require... Corpse Explosion is just so strong now. Like, I don't know how you couldn't put that in the top 10 even for starting out. You got Revives too, which is like super strong. It's just it's got a lot of density. Obviously, Cows and Chaos get absolutely smashed by that thing. And then Fist of the Heavens, Holy Bolt. It's looking pretty solid. Yeah, Teeth Necro, you need a 3+3 Teeth Wand and maybe like a +3 Teeth Shield, and then it's gonna absolutely shred Chaos. Yeah, that's the thing. That's why these builds are so good. That's why these builds are like, I think the top 10 here is pretty solid, honestly. I made sure to have one from each class. I think I did that across the board, except for Declone and Rathma, where there's no Necromancer builds listed in the top 10 overall, the overall top 10. And that's because, well, Necromancer is just booty for doing Declone or Rathma. That's because he dies, so he doesn't have enough health, so he dies. It's that simple. Good news is that there's an easier Declone in Rathma now. There's a level 1 version of them. So Necro, even though it's booty at them and probably can't do the harder difficulty ones very easily or at all, it can still actually kill them. I mean, that's why we have Fire Golems is great against Declone, you know. Poison Strike and Desecrate is pretty much the main build. And then Bone Spirit got buffed, so you know, there's not some bad builds here for Declone and Rathma. Alright, so there's actually a couple other things I wanted to talk about before we enter the question and answer section here, just before I complete it. With some Amazon crushes like Ubers very early on as well. That's why they're good starters, you know. And they also like can farm pretty well too. Freezing Arrow is a good farmer, Magic Arrow is good. So like, you know, if you want to play Amazon, even though Amazon's late game approaches aren't as strong as some of the other classes at the moment, except for maybe some of the Uber boss stuff like Plague Javelin Immolation is pretty good. Amazon's got a pretty decent time. Like you see some of the Amazon builds in the top 10 in Declan and Rathma, so you know, Amazon's not doing horrible. It's just like Uber Tristram summon Amazon is crushing, so it's got Jab as well. Jab is really good for Uber Tristram. But yeah, it's good stuff though. It's good stuff. Teeth Necro, I take down Declan pretty easy, but that's after like tons and tons of practice. Yeah, I don't know. That's not one I would recommend, right? So instead of recommending Teeth, I put Bone Spirit. Now it goes without saying that Teeth is a I could put Bone Spear here. Teeth is a synergy for Bone Spear and Bone Spirit, so with the buffs to these though, I don't even know if I would use Teeth anymore for these, honestly, my man. Because these got buffed so much and Teeth got nerfed. And these got buffed huge buffs. Like these got big buffs. I'd probably just use Bone Spear and Bone Spirit against the Uber bosses now. Yeah, but the Skellies, I'd just use freaking Bone Spear now. Like even against the Skellies, the Bone Spear does too much damage. It's not like there's that many of them. I mean, I guess you could use Teeth a little bit, like here and there. It's like it cleans them up a bit. I wouldn't use it though. Anyway, some kind of fun stuff though. We got you know, like rabies has come down quite a bit on some of these Uber approaches because its damage is so much lower now. It's just spread is still insane, which is why it destroys maps. You could still do declone with it though. I think Tornado is actually a real Uber approach now though, because they buffed tornadoes so much. I think you can do it. I don't think it's gonna be very hard. Druid's got strong, really strong tornado. Should be okay. Telekinesis, they keep buffing this. They buffed it again this season, so I'll put it on the list. These are some things that I changed this season. I put Sentinel on the list, sometimes separate from Blade Fury, sometimes by itself, because you can use it one way or the other. I made sure that Elemental Martial Arts, which is all the Elemental Martial Arts, you know, so people understand they can do that. Can do the Uber Tristram. Let's see, what else did I change this season real quick just to go through? Oh, so this is a big one. This is a big one. So Smite, of course, is looking a little bit more prominent against some of these things again, but it was still listed anyway last season. Obviously, though, because now like Crushing Blow goes all the way down to 1% with severe diminishing returns on Uber bosses, but that means Smite is actually able to get in enough damage, I think, to actually kill these now. So that's good. There's another thing though that I think is going to be meta, so I'm gonna let the community know what the meta is going to be before it even happens. So two-handed physical zeal I think is actually going to be the new GOAT for the Paladin when it comes to Declone or Rathma. So if you're going for that top 3, you might want to take that into account. There's a couple reasons I say that. You got the new Leoric sword, but that's not the only thing. There's also Doombringer that got buffed a lot, which is it's got weakened and it's got a huge amount of maximum life. And with the advent of Holy Sword, you do so much more damage with two-handed that Holy Sword will actually allow you to survive those fights, and you'll have life. So you'll actually have life on a Paladin for the first time ever, because you don't have to put anything into the shield. You don't have to put any points into Dex to like max it out. It's just Holy Sword. And you got life on top of it. So you should be hitting like 3,000 life with these two-handed Zealers. And you should also be hitting like you should also be doing a ton more damage too. Yeah, Rathma also counts as undead as well. And Declone is a demon. Right, exactly. Yeah, so like I said, the two-handed physical zeal I think is going to be the best Paladin build. I'm calling it right now, so I'm putting it on my tier list there. In addition to ranking them a bit differently. Blade Sentinel, by the way, feels really good now. You could kite really hard with Blade Sentinel. I think this is going to be GG. And then you got some of the other stuff going on here too as well. So yeah, I think two-handed physical zeal with 50% block and huge life is going to be really strong against these bosses. And it does 1 billion damage with two-handed zeal. That's going to hit really hard. It should be very strong. Of course, I think Holy Freeze is still up there though. I think you're still going to see a lot of people using Holy Freeze Zeal because that's also really strong. I definitely see that happening. And just remember, all these single target abilities can be used to kill these bosses. Things like Ice Arrow, um, Immolation Arrow, even like Lightning Bolt in some cases. Um, see a Lightning Bolt on this one here. Wolf Barbarian, obviously very, very tanky, and you can still get a lot of damage against a single target. It's not great for mapping, but it's great for Ubers. Berserk, though, is king probably, though, in a lot of scenarios, though, because that negative res reduction, which, by the way, was buffed this season again, so it was buffed again. It hits really hard, so that skill does a lot of damage. Part of completing some of these fights successfully, particularly Rathma Declone, is killing them faster than they can make you run out of potions. So that's it's really key. Definitely really key stuff. And of course, you can see like a lot of these abilities are just good. Like Ice Bolt is still probably the best Sorc Rathma killer. I don't see that changing, but I don't know. There's a lot of good stuff though, so there's a lot of good ideas to try if you guys are looking for Rathma and Declone. You see the rankings here, which I said are a little bit loose. One thing to note is that Dragon Talon was buffed as well inadvertently through the changing to the scaling and to the changes of Crushing Blow. So Dragon Talon coming back into the list. Like I said, there's definitely some things to take into account. Blade Fury is still insane against regular Ubers. Like that thing got buffed too. That thing will crush anything. But anyway, I've seen how strong these abilities are single target though. And of course how they can manage the ads for Rathma and Declone with other side abilities that are synergies or otherwise. So that's pretty much it, honestly. And Fury, even with all the nerfs, like I can't emphasize enough just how ridiculously strong that skill is. It's gonna take more than the nerfs they did to really make a dent, for sure. That's still insane, really super uber reliable ability there. But that two-handed zeal is on the up and up, man. That's gonna be the new Fury Druid with the buff, the Doombringer and the Holy Sword and everything else. And I don't know. I'd probably use Doombringer against most of those bosses. That thing is insane. But yeah. Anyway, guys, that's it. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to go over. Obviously, you can look at every individual ranking that I give and every individual build. I didn't go over all of them on the infographic to the side there for the Uber bosses and for the starter builds. I didn't go into them all, but you can look and see where they're at if you want good ideas for things that are good at starting out, things that are good for crushing early game. Just in general, knowing what to farm is all about knowing, where your immunities are, even in LOD content. So if you see Freezing Arrow here, well, it's good against density and not against cold immunes. Well, that means that Chaos and Cows are your go-to, right? So it's always key. And also remember, if the build does magic damage, has high some magic, the actual magic type damage, which is a specific type in Diablo 2. So it does magic damage, got big AoE, and or has high mobility, it's going to be a strong starter. And if it has none of those, it's probably a weak starter. So that's a trifecta of early game LOD content power. Just remember that, and see you guys all at the beginning of Season 8. Remember, of course, we will have timestamps for every section of this guide. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I always love to read the comments and whatnot. If you think I'm really wrong about something, you can also let me know that too. Feel free to yell at me. I hope you guys enjoy the content I put out. Hope you guys get inspired by these tier lists, inspired by all my testing, inspired by the demos and the guides that I put out to try this insanely awesome mod and to crush it. It's really, really insane stuff. Oh yeah, Tool shirt. Oh yeah, Tool, absolutely represent. I have a Diablo shirt too. Not wearing it right now though. Yeah, see that's the thing. The 3-frame attack speed is insane on Fury Druid. It is hard to bring down to earth. That's 100. That comment is spot on right there in the chat from Sejumi. Yeah, that's really what it comes down to, man. Like I retested like Windhammer. It's still, oh my goodness. And then Bariza, oh my goodness. Yeah, you can't bring it down just by nerfing all the synergies 4%, or which is what they did, or reducing his life by 400. All that means is that it might be a little tougher for him to do like the hardest difficulty Rathma or Declone, because he might die. He's actually a little bit more mortal, but only a little bit. Like that's it, man. That's it. So like those changes, they don't crush that build. They really don't. They don't do it. Okay, so if you see those nerfs, don't be worried about them. You know, there's a lot of nerfs that happen like to Rabies or to Fury. They were pretty much inconsequential. Rabies got hurt a lot more against single targets, if anything, but that's about it. Rabies isn't looking too hot for the single targets anymore, but that's okay. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's like 3 hours, 38 minutes. All right, so I'm gonna take a quick question and answer session. Are there any questions from anyone in the chat? And then we're gonna end it. We're gonna smash it in season 8. See you guys there with my hardcore Claws of Thunder assassin farming arcane if I can get to that point. If not, I might try to make like a two-handed paladin. And I don't know, maybe even softcore so I can kill. I want to do two-handed zeal against Rathma or something. I think that's gonna be fun. Personally, I think that'd be a lot of fun. But two-handed physical zeal against Rathma would be pretty awesome. Could also do Holy Freeze too, though, but it's all good. Anyway, so what any questions in the chat, man? Any questions at all? So you guys I've been answering questions as, you know, I've been doing this, but I want to know if there's any more questions. Does anyone like have any like specific questions you don't feel like I answered while you were here? Maybe you just didn't hear it. Maybe you don't know. 118 builds, man, 80 hours of testing, plus like more Uber builds, which are probably adds up to about 130, 140 builds in total. This just really goes to show how much diversity of fun you can really have. Very few of them actually suck, really. Very few of them are C tier or lower for mapping. And then when you go over to Uber builds, there's just so many different builds you can do that are interesting or strong in one way or another. It's always fun. And then starter builds, you know, I got at least 5 from each class now. I standardized it. So you can kind of see like all the different, like Blade Sentinel's an actual starting approach now. That Blade Sentinel's looking nice. I'd farm Chaos with it. Farm Pit with it. I'd farm but you could even kill Mephisto pretty fast with that, honestly. I don't know. Farm Council. I don't know. I like the changes to Blade Sentinel. That's looking good. I'm sorry I don't have a demo for that, but what happened with the demo on that is they changed it again last minute, and then I forgot to make the changed version of it of a demo, because if I made the OP version, it would have given people a very false impression, which was earlier on in the beta. But yeah, anyway. Damn, I have demos for like almost all the other ones, though. Question: why does Tentacle Druid not receive the proper love it deserves? Tentacle Druid? You mean this crap? Poison Creeper? It's because it's still too weak, man. It doesn't have enough AoE. The Vines AoE is, or the... Honestly, it's the main problem with this being good in mapping, better than D, that is its mechanics. So the creepers don't do damage very consistently at all. They like go under the earth and then back up. When they actually hit, they do a lot of damage. Now they do, as of like season 7 or 6 or whatever. Whenever this went from F- to D+. I don't remember when that was, but yeah, it's still kind of trash though. The mechanics of that skill is kind of trash. You're curious about clay golems, a C versus an A for fire golems. They have no AoE damage. So like the thing about fire golems is that they're doing holy fire. That's most of their damage. It's not their punch damage. Clay golems only punch things. That's literally it. So like they only, if you only used clay golems and you invested all your synergies into the clay golems, which is what this is. Obviously you can mix clay golems with almost any build you want to on the Necromancer, but if you only use clay golems and invested all the damage synergies into them, which you could do, which is why this is a build listed here, all you have is 6 clay golems slapping shit. That's why. Whereas with this, all you have to do is teleport near the monsters, and they take enough damage to die in one shot or nearly one shot, and they die. That's the big difference. That's the big difference. That's a good question though. I'm starting Warcry Barb for sure. Yeah, Warcry Barb is still a great start with Travancore. Travancore is still insane. You just got to really put in a lot of points into find item now, and it's even then it's I don't know, man. Like, it's looking anemic. It's I really hope they put that back to LOD numbers at the very least. That would be cool. Played until Nightmare and Blade Sentinel, and it was OP. Yeah, Blade Sentinel was really strong for starting out. As you can see here, I have it as a potential starting build. I think I'm not sure how OP it is, so I'm being a bit conservative. I could maybe put that over Phoenix Strike though, because I have a feeling that martial builds are still not like the strongest starters, which is fine because they have to do melee range and shit. So if I had to guess, Blade Sentinel is at least a conversation for the top 3 assassin starters. Now you say that. But yeah, it's the tier list is basically final unless there's any further changes that come in the next couple days, and then we'll adjust it. What I don't understand is how the power of a Sea Necro still exists, and look at all the S- builds in Amazon, compare them to that OP build. You mean you don't understand why they haven't been balanced appropriately? That's because what happened is the Amazon started out as the strongest class in the game. Chat might remember this. I think in my earlier tier list, Amazon was #1. And what happened is Amazon had the strongest Uber builds, it had the strongest mapping builds, it had the strongest everything. And then guess what happened? Over the last couple seasons, it got nerfed into the ground. And everything got nerfed into the ground. You know, these skills locks their deck scaling, so rip that. Freezing Arrow has always been that strong, but that's like one of the only skills that hasn't been completely nerfed into the ground. It's still amazing at starting. Summon's still crazy for Ubers, but it still got nerfed even for that. Poison Plague Javelin, took a lot of nerfs to the face for Ubers. Lightning Fury, and Lightning Strike just took some really hard hitting nerfs in the last couple seasons. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's just maybe over nerfed. Maybe these are over buffed. I don't know what to tell you. Maybe they just need to nerf like 8 builds from these 8 builds here. You see these S plus builds, or even maybe some of these S builds. These builds are really insane. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't have any problem with builds feeling amazing when you get really good gear. I think they should. I think they should feel amazing. I think you should be able to crush the content with them. So that begs the question: is if that's the case, then maybe these builds should be stronger. I'm not sure what the answer is, but it's either to buff the builds that are struggling a bit, or it's to nerf the insane uber performers, right? That's it. That's the only answer. At least the tentacles are higher rated. That's just I'm just the messenger, guys. I'm reporting the testing. I am doing testing reporting, and I'm doing build analysis. I'm doing build theory crafting with the patch notes, and that includes for Uber boss killing as well. I'm doing all that stuff. I'm doing research. I'm just reporting this is a report essentially. This is a PD2 Season 8 report. That's how you can think of it. And this is my report. Someone might come out with some slightly different things in the report if they had something similar. It's possible. I'm not claiming I'm God or anything. But we do a lot of work for this for sure. It is a tough question. I have a question. I want to do Uber speedrun solo self round at the start of the season. Do you have any suggestions? Yes. Amazon. Amazon summon Amazon. You see this build right here? You see summon Valkyrie's Decoy Strafe? That is like your best shot at that, and there's a reason why it's in the top 10 for starting overall. You want to do Ubers and Uber speedruns solo self-found? You can do this almost naked. You can do it almost naked. Just get some auras on them, keep spawning them, and they will kill the bosses for sure. They will. That's a great build for that. Obviously, you could use other summon builds too. Uber speedruns will be slower with some of these other approaches. I do think Smite, though, like Physical Zeal is great. Jab is also great for Ubers early on. Looking at some of the Uber builds. Frenzy doesn't take that much. Blade Fury would also be insanely fast too. Fury really just takes like a cheap weapon Fury Druid's crazy, honestly. Like, all you need is like an upgraded Warlord's Trust or something, and smash, 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 and it'll destroy everything. Like, Fury's is still insanely strong. So yeah, like there's definitely some good budget options. I mentioned some of them right there. Hopefully one of those works for you, man, or you pick the one that you think might be the most interesting. Yeah, you can permit. Yeah, faux paladin's good too. Where is that here? Recommended Uber Tristram. Yeah, this isn't like listed as one of the top for like late game, but for early game, it's actually really good. So it's listed on the Uber list here. Any of these builds in the Uber list, just check them out and think about which ones are going to be best for starting out. And I think you'll get your answer. You know, there's a reason why Faux Holy Bolt is listed in these builds, because you can do it, and it's very strong. What merc would you recommend for Faux Paladin and Hardcore Solo Self-Found? Hmm. Yeah, Merc? So I actually recommend like an Act 3 mercenary for that. You just want something that helps supplement your damage because you already have like conviction and whatnot. Actually, you can also go Act 4 for the magic damage debuff, so you can also go Sanctuary. I'd either go the light mercenary, the light Act 4 mercenary, or an Act 3 mercenary with high survivability, with like cleansing or prayer. That's what I would do on that. Can we straight up level up as Ice Lance or Ice Barrage? Yes, you can. As a matter of fact, you see where it is in the starter lineup, Aussie Reject? Remember, check out the entirety of the infographics, not just the late game mapping tier list. Ice Barrage, #1 Sorc build for starting out. Definitely. It's even #1 as an overall, too. Yeah, that build's a monster. I think it's going to be GG. You always forget to scroll. Yeah, you gotta scroll, man. You gotta scroll. I wish I maybe made it a little bit easier for phone users, because I feel like this kind of scrolling is worse than like down scrolling. Light Act 4 Merc. So there's light and dark Act 4 mercenaries. The light Merc has healing with Holy Nova, and it also has Sanctuary Aura, which is a magic res debuff, and sends Holy Bolts from the foe, or just from Holy Bolt or magic damage. That's going to boost your damage. You can also use Sanctuary Aura on yourself, though, if you're going Holy Bolt on yourself. So there's a reason why, yeah, Fist of the Heavens Holy Bolt is still the top starter for a Paladin. It's because you have all these options for increasing your damage, and you can do it from a distance. It's easy to increase your damage. At level 25, you already got 3 bolts. It's good damage from afar. You can crush Chaos with it, which is one of the best farming areas. Yeah, I mean, you can crush cows too. You know, you can even crush with Holy Bolt. You can do Travancore. I wouldn't do foe against Travancore, but anyway, both of them are the same though. Got an ad. All right, guys, I think that's it. Thank you guys for hanging out for the live video. I'm gonna post this on YouTube tomorrow. Thank you for smashing. Guys, if you want to access the tier list, there it is. You can access it yourself. So this is a open source document. Any of you guys can access. You can view it at least. Not you can't edit it. Obviously, I am. Don't ask to edit it. Some people actually ask to edit this document. I'm like, no. But anyway, yeah. But no, you can all view it. It's all good. And I'll have it posted. A link to it posted on the videos. We'll have all the timestamps and everything. But thank you, Senpai and team. Thank you to the awesome PD2 community. I will see you guys in Season 8, September 22nd, 10 a.m. PT. I don't know if I'm going to be playing immediately as soon as the season starts this time, because I don't know if I can, but I'll be there as soon as possible. And hopefully you guys all crush it. Obviously, we're going to be playing a lot, so let's do it. I'm glad you think that, De La Puff, that you think I make the PD2 experience better. I don't know if everyone agrees, but you know, some people don't like the whole game being figured out like this, but You know, I think it's cool. I think it gives the players that don't play so much to learn all this a chance at actually making something they'll enjoy playing, and they at least understand what they're up against if they want to play something. But yeah, anyway, have a great night, guys. GG. Let's crush it. Dark Humility over now. Twitch.tv/Dark Humility.